Preparing to live stream, counting down. Don't say anything you don't want anyone else to hear.
I've got it up on my phone, so it'll tell me if it works.
All right, we're preparing to live stream, counting down. Don't say anything you don't want anyone else to hear. Oh, that's a problem. Okay, that's good. And we're live. Thank you to anyone who has tuned in early to the pre-session for A11y Bytes Online this year. The first presentation is going to start on the hour in about 15 minutes time, but in the meantime, we're actually going to have a chat to some of our A11y Bytes coordinators from around Australia and New Zealand. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Zoe Horton, who is representing A11y Bytes Auckland, Catherine, who is representing A11y Bytes Wellington, Julie, who is representing A11y Bytes Perth, and Adam, who is representing A11y Bytes Melbourne. And Melbourne was actually the second A11y Bytes event that ran after Sydney. So A11y Bytes Sydney is 8 years old, A11y Bytes Melbourne is 7 years old. So he has been doing this for a very long time as well. Thank you all so much for joining me. I wanted to get started by asking, what are you excited about Global Accessibility Awareness Day? Julie, I might start with you.
So what I love about Global Accessibility Awareness Day is the global part. And I love that today we're running across 2 countries. I think that's awesome. I really am very interested in hearing about how people in other countries, perhaps with fewer resources, are dealing with accessibility. And if there's anything that those of us in places like Australia and New Zealand can do to help out. But I think mostly just kind of spreading the word. We want the whole globe to be accessible, please.
Oh, great. What about you, Zoe?
Yeah, kind of similar really to Julie. I love the fact that it's a time of year where the whole world starts to recognise the need for accessibility and the chance to raise awareness about the impacts on certain people every day in their everyday life. I also love the fact that there's just so many GAD events or Global Accessibility Awareness Day events. It's hard to choose from. So there's obviously awareness is being raised. And I really in particularly like to hear lived experiences of people with disabilities and hearing about their successes and the challenges. Yeah, it just really fuels my passion for what I do as an accessibility consultant and an advocate for accessibility, really.
Wonderful. So I'm actually going to pause there. Like all A11y Bytes, we are having a bit of a technical issue and it doesn't appear that we are live. Just bear with us a tick.
does this, I know what I'm trying to do is switch back.
Hi all, we are back. Unfortunately, for some reason, we have two links that are for our live stream, which is causing some difficulties. For now, obviously, those people have found the right link, can actually hear us, and we're working to try and direct those that have the wrong link over to here. So we'll keep on going with our pre-show. We might need to delay our start just slightly as we try to rectify this issue. I feel like saying it's never an A11y Bytes without a technical issue, or at least I can say that from A11y Bytes Sydney and what has happened before. So we're being true to form, although it's probably not helping any of our stress levels. So we're actually checking in with our A11y Bytes coordinators, asking why you're excited about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. We heard from Julie and Zoe. Catherine, what makes you excited about GAD?
Well, I guess this year I've seen the lead up to GAD has been the most exciting. So this has been a couple of months in the making. And we've been having discussions with people all over Wellington in different companies from government and private sector, all talking about the different activities that they're going to run or had planned to run. At the moment, we're all stuck at home and having to work from home, which has put a bit of a downer on the plans. But getting to meet people and talk about accessibility issues and share ideas and just grow the network is just been fantastic. So events like this actually have a much bigger effect than just the event itself, but to get to know other people has just been amazing. So that's great.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Catherine. What about you, Adam?
It'd help if I took myself off mute. So I was going to say that Julie stole my answer because she kind of half did, but I just love the fact that there is a day dedicated to accessibility awareness. Yes, we've got International Day of People with Disabilities, and that's great. But I think the fact that there's a day of the year dedicated to raising awareness about accessibility is just great. I mean, a whole day of accessibility. How cool is that?
I think we all definitely love it. So what is your top tip for getting everyone talking, thinking, and learning about digital access and people with different disabilities? Catherine.
Darn it, I was hoping that you weren't going to ask me first. I guess when it comes to getting, it's kind of a tricky question. When it comes to getting people kind of enthusiastic about accessibility, more than you just told us we had to do this, I guess I like to get people to think about situations outside of their normal experience. So trying to do something that they would normally do on their computer to try and get to do it on their mobile phone on a tiny screen. And the challenges that they find and come across, and while they're laughing and swearing and whatever they're doing, and I can sort of say, well, look, these are the sort of barriers that people that you're not thinking about come across every day, and more so. So I hope that was kind of where you were going with this.
Absolutely. Did anyone else want to share their thoughts? Julie?
Sorry, trouble unmuting there. I always have thoughts. The one thing that I have done if I am talking to people who are a bit more techie is I like to show them some cool assistive technology. The kind of people who get enthusiastic about monitors and keyboards can also get enthusiastic about Braille keyboards and screen reader software. So I find that sometimes is just sort of conspicuously show people some cool things and wait for them to be curious. But yeah, I think other times it's just reminding people that people they know, people they already know and love need this. And they just might not have thought of it in that way before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I often ask people to think about parents or grandparents, depending on how old they are.
Yeah.
And I'm just prompting them to think about that. So they sort of go, oh yeah, that you know, yeah, I didn't think about it that way.
And a lot of people end up saying, oh, yeah, my cousin has a disability, but I think of them as just my cousin. I didn't think about how it might affect how they use the internet. And you're like, oh, well, that's good. You can now consider what could be helpful for that.
Fantastic. So for anyone who's joined us, this is the A11y Bytes 2020 pre-event session. I know we're supposed to kick off at 4 with the presentations, but we have had a bit of a mix up with some of the links that have gone out. So I'm actually going to ask our panelists a final question, and then we will take a short break while we get Glenn set up, and we will be starting just a little bit past the hour as we try to get that message out there of where the right link is. So my last question to you is, what session are you most looking forward to today in A11y Bytes? And what beverage will you be sipping on as you watch that session? Adam.
I should take myself off mute. So, what session am I most looking forward to? You know what? I'm actually really looking forward to Julie's, because I know it's about animation, and I didn't get to see it the last time she did it, so I'm kind of looking forward to the bite-sized version of that. And in terms of what I'll be sipping while I'm watching, I don't know, probably some water. I don't drink, so you know.
Hey, it's any beverage, that doesn't matter.
That's right.
Thanks, Adam. What about you, Julie?
Well, you've got to keep your wits about you while I'm presenting. So yeah, I am actually really looking forward to, and let me just check, I had it up on a screen so that I would say it properly. And now my other screen has gone away. So of course that's a problem. Alistair's talk about designing for cognitive accessibility. I'm going by memory now. I might have the name wrong. But designing for cognitive is something that I really feel like I could do with learning a lot more about. So I'm very excited for that one. I will probably be having a hot chocolate because it is cold here today. So warm drink for me. And it is also in Perth. It's a little bit earlier. Perhaps for one of the later presentations, I might bust out a glass of wine.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Julie. What about you, Zoe?
So the session I'm looking forward to the most, this was a tricky question because there are numerous, especially Bill Bennett's, because he's obviously representing New Zealand and a subject that I think is really pertinent. But I think the session Let's Get Physical about the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. First of all, what a catchy title. And unfortunately, the Olivia Newton-John song now is whirling through my head and won't stop. Thanks for that. But yeah, just hearing first-hand experience and feedback on the controller and how Microsoft have managed to make it accessible, I think that would be really interesting. Yeah, and in terms of beverage, being English, I'm currently drinking a English tea, but like Julie, later on, I think it will progress or regress to something a little bit more alcoholic.
Awesome. And Catherine, what are you looking forward to?
I'm actually looking forward to Alistair's talk about cognitive disabilities, just because, like Julie said, this is something that I need to learn more about and find out more about. I'm also really looking forward to Julie's presentation, because I get a lot of people who say, you can't make it look beautiful and have it be accessible and do animation. And I'm going to prove them wrong. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I will be drinking hot chocolate because it is cold here in Wellington. And it's also by that point getting quite late in the night. So yeah, no caffeine for me.
Awesome, thank you. I think I'm also looking forward to Scott's presentation on the Microsoft controller. I'm kind of a bit geeky and I'd love to know more about, how that's working. During today, I'm going to have to stick on the water, but after this, I'm definitely breaking out the gin because I think I'm going to need one after the next 3 hours. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for our pre-session. For those who are tuning into the live stream, we are delaying our start just slightly because we did have a link out there to the live stream, which for some reason hasn't worked. It is actually changed when we hit the live stream button, best laid plans. So we're going to take a very brief break. We're going to get Glenn set up. You may actually hear us setting up in the background because this stream is live and it's going to stay live for the whole session. So please just ignore us as we chatter away, get Glenn set up, and we will be back in just a sec to start his presentation. Thank you all. Hello all, welcome to A11y Bytes 2020. We have Glenn here on the line, but first of all, I am actually going to start the event and tell you a little bit about us. I would first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners across all of the lands on which we are virtually meeting today and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'd like to welcome you all to A11y Bytes 2020. This is our 8th year running A11y Bytes events, but our first year running the event online. For those of you who have just tuned in, apologies if you did have the wrong live stream link. We thought that that was the right link, but obviously when we hit live stream, it didn't quite work. So apologies for that. We are relying on quite a bit of technology today. If we do have any technical issues, we will work quickly to try and resolve them. If they cannot be resolved, we will share the news on our social media channels. So stay tuned if you do lose the stream. However, we will continue to record the presentations for a release on our YouTube channel later. This event is also live captioned, and I've already seen a few comments in the chat about how great that is. We would like to thank our sponsors Intopia, who have sponsored the live captioning. The caption should be appearing in your YouTube stream now. We'll also share a link to the captions in chat that can be also viewed in the web browser if you like. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Glenn Walker, Director of Accessibility at Applause. Glenn joins us all the way from the US. It's actually midnight there at the moment, and he is going to talk to us about the tab key. Thanks, Glenn.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Hey, well, good afternoon, everybody. I think many of you are probably kind of ending your Global Accessibility Awareness Day with these events here. This is fantastic. Thank you for putting on this A11y Bytes conference today. And I'm just starting my Global Accessibility Awareness Day, having just been a few minutes after midnight here out in the Western United States. I'm in Utah. And so my name is Glenn Walker. I'm the Director of Accessibility at applause.com. My contact info is on this first slide. My professional email address is gwalker@applause.com, and my personal address is glenn.walker@gmail.com, and Glenn is spelled with one N. My slides are also available through a bit.ly link, and it's on the slides here, plus when you go back and watch this again, you'll be able to get it, but it's a bit.ly link that points to put it on my tab with a dash between each of the words, and it's all lowercase. And there's also a longer version of this talk, a 40-minute version. So you're gonna get the 10-minute version today. So I'm happy to be here with you. I'm just gonna be talking about this really cool key here that I'm guessing most of you have on your keyboard. How much testing can you do for accessibility with just the tab key? And it's a really fascinating topic. I do want to start off real quick just with kind of a little history that if you go back and look at some older typewriters, the tab key was over on the right side of the keyboard. It was often a different color. The picture here is an older typewriter. It's a red tab key compared to all the white keys on the typewriter. Kind of a little more modern-ish, at least at the time. Keyboard, again, also had tab over on the right side. And then when you zoom ahead to the electric typewriters, the tab key finally moved over to the left side. And I don't know what year that happened, but eventually tab moved over to the left side. And then of course, with our keyboards today, right, the tab key is over there on the left side. So I just wanted to set a little baseline there. I'm sure everybody knows their keyboard and the layout, but I wanted to show you a little bit of brief history there. So I wanted to start off with a caveat so that I'm talking about testing using the tab key and finding accessibility issues with the tab key. I'm not talking about user experience or usability testing. I'm not mimicking how a user would access a site. Now, there are some users, obviously, that use the tab key to navigate around, but there's lots of other keys. You know, if you're a screen reader user, you have all kinds of shortcut keys. And I'm not implying that a screen reader user only uses the tab key to navigate. So again, I'm just using the tab key to help find accessibility issues when testing on a website. So why do I like the tab key? Well, no special hardware is required. Anybody can test with it. We all have keyboards, whether it's built into your laptop or connected through USB or wireless or whatever the case may be. If you, for whatever reason, you don't have a keyboard or it's broken, it's a very low budget item, right? You can pick one up very cheap, pretty much anywhere. So what I want to talk about today is when I test with the tab key, tabbing through the interface to see if I can get access to all the elements. But while I'm doing that, I am also using a custom style sheet with my browser. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. So tabbing through the interface, using a custom style sheet, and I often run with a screen reader running at the same time. Now, for those who have not used a screen reader, don't be afraid of them. A lot of times you can do this testing just having the screen reader running in the background. So you're not really interacting with it. You're just letting it run so you can listen to how the page sounds when you're navigating through it. And we don't have time with a short 10-minute presentation today to show you a little bit of screen reader, but I will have a demo, probably the last 3 or 4 minutes, to show some of the keyboard tabbing that you can do. So as far as setting a custom style sheet, all the major browsers support it. Both Firefox and Chrome do it via a stylus, via a plugin called Stylus. And Safari and Internet Explorer, they both allow you to point your browser to an external file that can contain the style sheets. And I haven't tried, well, Microsoft Edge currently does not support it, or at least the version I have does not support it, but with Edge being built on Chromium, it's supposed to be able to support the same plugins that Chrome does. So hopefully Stylus will work on Edge. But in general, most of the major browsers support a custom style sheet. And so the line of code I have here on the screen, right in the middle of the slide here, is *:focus. So this is the contents of my custom style sheet. So *:focus just means every element on the page, whether it's a button, a checkbox, an input field, a link, it could be a div with a tab index of 0. Anything that can receive focus, I am setting my outline to a solid 4-pixel purple border. And that's kind of the little screenshot I have there of the Amazon logo with a purple border around it, because I want something very big and bold to me, so I can really tell where my focus is on the page as I'm tabbing through and navigating through. Now I have a lot more details on how to install the plugin or how to use point your browser to an external file on my slides that you can download. Again, that's a bit.ly link, and put it on my tab, all lowercase with a dash between each word. And the second piece, in addition to running with a custom style sheet, is using a screen reader in the background. For Mac users, you have VoiceOver that's built in. Command F5 will turn that on and off. And I found that I teach a class on how to use screen readers, that generally there's a bigger learning curve when you're learning how to use VoiceOver for the first time, compared to those people when I teach about JAWS or NVDA. They're a little bit easier to learn, but in either case, you can just kind of have it running in the background and just listening to what's going on. And I'm not going to go into very much detail with screen readers, given the time. So what can you test with just the tab key? Well, for those familiar with the Web Content and Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, I have listed here on this slide 9 different success criteria. And if you're testing for WCAG 2.1 AA, that is 50 checkpoints, essentially. I have 9 here, so that's almost 20% of WCAG that you can test with a tab key. I mean, that's amazing. That's a lot of the requirements there. Now, I do have some caveats on a few of these. I have a comment that says with SR next to a few of them. That's with a screen reader. So link purpose and context, or error identification, and name role value. You can test with the tab key, but you need to run the screen reader as well so you can hear how things are going. I also have an asterisk next to 2.4.7 focus visible, because if you are truly testing the focus indicator on the page, then you need to turn off your custom style sheet, because you want to see what the page really looks like, how the developers and designers created that page. But there's a lot of testing you can do for focus visible with the custom style sheet turned on, and I'll show you that in a minute. So a lot of problems you often find with running with a custom style sheet is that your focus disappears. And this happens oftentimes because objects or elements are kind of fake hidden, right? So when my focus disappears, that means the focus moved to an interactive element. It could be a link or a button, whatever the case may be. But that element has been pushed off the screen or somehow kind of fake hidden. It's not using display none. It's just using some other CSS properties to hide the element. It could be the left or the X property to a big negative number to push it off the screen. It could be the opacity is set to 0, so it's really there on the page. It's just transparent. You can't see it. Or the width or height might be set to 0 pixels to make it, 0 pixels tall. You can't see it. But when you do that, both the screen reader and the keyboard user can still tab and put their focus on those elements. But now your focus disappears because it's off the screen somewhere. And so you often have to inspect the code to check that. So this is fantastic. I want to show you real quick, just a demo. I'm going to pop over to Amazon. And I hope the font here is big enough. Oh, I didn't change my resolution. Let me do that real quick so that maybe it'll appear a little easier for you guys to see. Nothing like a live demo here. All right. Well, that's good enough there. All right. So I'm here. I just brought up Amazon.com, and I'm going to tab my first tab into the screen. Skip to main content shows up. That's fantastic. That's 2.4.1 bypass blocks. All right. Amazon has skip to main content, has a way to bypass blocks. Let me keep tabbing. So I'm on the hamburger menu and the Amazon logo. All right. Things look pretty good so far. I'm in the search area. I'm on the magnifying glass. Now my purple outline isn't showing up. There's something is drawing on top of it. But if I tab again, now I'm on the sign in link. And there's this American flag right between the two for setting the language. If I tab backwards, I'm back on the magnifying glass. So it's jumping over that. So that could be a 2.4.3 issue, which is focus order. But if you look carefully at 2.4.3, it says if the focus order affects the meaning or the operation of the page, then it's a problem. Well, in this case here, I can still operate the page. It might be a little confusing that I jumped over something. Hopefully I can still get to that element maybe later on in the tab order, but it might give me something to look at or keep my eye on. So let me just keep tabbing through. All right, so now I'm on this menu kind of near the top. It's actually a pretty long menu. So when I get to the end, it kind of scrolls it. So I keep tabbing. Oh, now my tab just disappeared. Can I tab again? Well, now I'm on the language setting. All right, so I can get to that element. That's fantastic. But let me tab backwards. All right, it disappeared. And now it's on Shopper Toolkit. So let me tab forward once. So now I'm on the element that I can't see. Right, there's a problem here. And I'm going to inspect the code. I'm going to hit my context menu and inspect code. All right, let me click on the element just above it so I can get rid of the blue highlighting there to make it a little bit easier to read, hopefully. Well, this is interesting. So there's a hidden link on the Amazon site that has an ARIA label of click to call our disability customer support line. All right, so they have a link that is accessibly related, but is not accessible. You know, it's kind of sadly ironic that they have a link there that you can't see, right? And so this link is available for screen reader users, but why limit it just to screen reader users? There might be other people that want to call a customer support line having to do with disability customer support. And if we look at, let me click on this element again, and we see, and I don't want to jump too much into great detail here for coding, but it's pointing to this class called nav hidden aria. And if we look over to the right, nav hidden aria, they have the left position set to -10,000. They have the width and height set to 1 pixel, overflows hidden. So they're kind of doing this fake hiding. So let me just get rid of this real quick. Do a little live coding here and pop back over to the browser. Well, there's that disability customer support. Fantastic. Now everybody gets it, right? Everybody can see that. It may be very helpful to have. All we did was just change the styling on that. So let me keep tabbing. So after customer support, all right, now we go to the language, tab again, focus disappeared, tab again, now we're in the carousel. So for the last element here, let me tab backwards. Here's another one that's invisible. Let's inspect that. All right, here's another link that is visually hidden. It's actually contained in a div that has a class of off screen. And if we look at the style, again, we see a height of 1 pixel, left of 0. That's not too bad. Oh, the top is set to -500 pixels. So it's pushed way off the top of the screen, right? Well, look at this link. It says, welcome to Amazon.com. If you prefer a simplified shopping experience, which some people might, try Amazon.com/access. It's similar to the mobile app, and it says stay on Amazon.com for all the full features. Well, here's another link that is available to screen readers, but not to other users, but it may be very handy to have, right? So why hide that? In fact, let's just get rid of the style sheet here, pop back over, and now we can see this big link. Now, Amazon probably doesn't want a big link on their page that looks like this, but they could make it appear when the tab focuses to it, similar to how the skip link works. So, I'm not asking them to put this big link here, but they do have links that are available to screen reader users, but not to other users. So this is just a real quick overview of setting a custom style sheet. And I wish I could show you the screen reader as well, because there's other fantastic information you can find by doing this. But all I really did was hit the tab key, and I can find, almost 20% of WCAG and accessibility issues. Let me go back to my slide so you can see the contact information. Again, my name is Glenn Walker. And if you want to contact me, if you have questions later, gwalker@applause.com or glenn.walker@gmail.com, and that's Glenn with one N. And again, my slides are on bit.ly, and it's put it on my tab with a dash between each word, and it's all lowercase. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's pretty amazing what we can do with the with something that's so simple as a tab key. We're going to take a short break. We will be swapping over presenters to Bill. So you may hear a little bit of chatter in the background because this stream will continue live for the next 3 hours. So we'll be back with you soon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bill. I think that was a nice swap over.
Ready to go?
So ready to go. Wonderful. Well, Bill, thanks so much for joining us. This is Bill Bennett, a technology journalist and blogger. Bill joins us from New Zealand, and he is here today to share his thoughts as a person with macular degeneration and what he can do now to make life easier if his sight worsens. Thanks, Bill.
Hi. Yeah, you can tell from my accent, I may be living in Auckland. I've been here for about 30 years, but I'm not originally an Aucklander. I'm a technology journalist. I've been doing this for 40 years now, and I've worked in newspapers, magazines. I do quite a bit of radio. I used to do a lot of TV, still do a little of that. And I write about business and technology and the places where those things overlap a lot. You can hear me quite a lot at the moment on Radio New Zealand and News Talk, if you're in New Zealand, that is. My work for the New Zealand Herald slowed down a lot. I'm a freelance, and we've been told there's not going to be a lot of work for us until at least later this year. So I had to look up the dates when this happened, but about 7 years ago, I noticed something wasn't so good with my eyes. I was reading the newspaper, and it was a bit of a struggle to read it. But I thought, you're just getting a bit older, there's no big deal. And then I wanted to get a book from the library, and the only edition they had of the book that I was looking for was a large print book. And I started reading it. I thought, well, hang on, this is really easy to read. This is good. Something is wrong with my eyes. So I hopped off to the ophthalmist for a test, and he did the usual stuff. And he got this new machine in, and he said, I want to try this out on you. I think it will help. And he looked at the back of my eyes with his new tool, and he started looking very concerned. And he said, look, there's nothing to worry about right now, but you're probably going to have macular degeneration. Your eyes are in the back, your eyes are in a bad shape. He gave me some tablets and said, look, get back in touch if anything happens with your eyes. Well, it was not very long at all before something did happen. I was at home in the kitchen fixing dinner, and I was cutting something with a knife, and the knife suddenly looked bent. And next day I noticed a lot of things looking a bit bent. So I went to the ophthalmist, went back to the ophthalmist, and he booked an emergency appointment with a specialist for the very next day. First thing the next day. Obviously, it was quite important to get down there fast. When I got down there was some quick testing, and it turned out that a blood vessel at the back of my eye had burst, and they could treat me on the spot. And that involved an injection in the eye. And I tell you, there's never a day in your life when you wake up and you think, today I'm going to have an injection in my eye. That's not a big deal. Since then, I've had a lot of injections. I actually have both eyes injected, and that's pretty much every month for the last 5 years or so. I've had that. It's something you normally get in your late 70s, and I was 20 years younger than most of the people in the clinic when I got this. So it was, you know, it was definitely, it's definitely something genetic and not the usual thing that older people get. But I was also extremely lucky because when I was diagnosed with having this, it was only a few years after there was a treatment, 5 or 6 years earlier, and there wouldn't have been much in the way of a treatment they could give me. And within months of the diagnosis, I would probably have been declared legally blind. Not totally blind, but too blind to drive and too blind to do a lot of the work that I do at the moment, or at least without considerable retraining. Well, the treatment worked well, and he said that possibly over the years it could, we could maintain things, but it's possible that things could deteriorate and that eventually I'll be either blind or partially blind. As it turns out, the treatments have gotten better, the science has gotten better, and there's advances all the time, and it's not too bad. I mean, provided I have my injections, most of the time I don't need to wear glasses. I sometimes need to wear reading glasses if it's small print, and I need to wear long distance glasses if I go, say if I'm going to go to Eden Park to watch the All Blacks beat the Wallabies, then I'll definitely need some glasses to watch that. Sometimes I get a bit tired, and I might need to call on some of the accessibility features, but generally I don't need to. But the point is I felt I had to start planning for when I do, and I'm in a very fortunate position when it came to this, because in the past I've written a few stories about accessibility, so I knew the subject area, and I knew what was going on, and I knew some of the work that was there, but I didn't know everything. And so I did what journalists do, and that is I started reading a lot, and then I started speaking to people who I knew, who knew about this subject. And once I started talking to people, I realized that actually this wasn't my first brush with accessibility. I had something many years ago when I was a school student. I was diagnosed as being dyslexic, and you think, well, hang on a minute, dyslexic and you work as a journalist, it's a bit odd. Well, it turns out that I'm not actually dyslexic. I'm unable to write very well with a pen and pencil, and it's a long story, but when I finally found myself in front of a typewriter keyboard, I was perfectly fine. But in a sense, the typewriter keyboard for me was the first accessibility aid that I used, and it meant that I was much more comfortable with the whole idea about accessibility and using accessibility tools. And one of the first jobs I had as a journalist was about accessibility. It was almost, I think it probably was the first press conference I went to, which was in 1981, a long time ago. And I visited this company which was working on a new speech recognition software product. And it was extraordinarily crude by today's standards. It could read, it was like a screen reader. It could read text, and it sounded a bit like the voice that was associated with Stephen Hawking. But it could also understand words, but it could only understand 10 words. So you could tell things like, you could move the cursor around. But it wasn't a cursor like you have with a mouse today. It was the old-fashioned cursors on the text screen cursor. It could move that cursor around, and it could open files and so on. It could do 1 or 2 things, but it could only understand 10 words. So it was extremely limited. And at that press conference, they told me within 2 years, you'll be using this. Keyboards are dead. People won't use keyboards anymore, and we'll all be speaking to our computers and they'll understand us. Here we are 40 years later, and it's just about happening. Anyway, back to my plan to deal with the possible effects of going blind, maybe. The first thing I did is I looked at the technology I was using, and at the time I was using a Windows laptop and an Android phone, and I started researching the market, and I found lots of features and articles and so on saying that well, actually, Apple does a better job of accessibility than Windows or Android would do at that time. And so I thought, well, I'll go and talk to the people I know who are in that community. And I pretty much got that feedback that, yeah, you're better off going with Apple, although it's much more expensive than sticking with Windows or Android. So, so that was the first thing I found out when I started looking. And I'm in a very fortunate position because of my work. I'm able to call computer companies and borrow stuff to write about them, to review equipment and so on. I sometimes will review a phone or a computer for a newspaper or a magazine on my own site. So I was in a position where I could borrow stuff to test out the accessibility features. And the first thing I borrowed was an Apple iPad. And I would say within a week of the iPad arriving, I knew I went out and bought one. It was that good. And I could almost stop at this point because for my purposes, the iPad, even at that stage, did a lot of the things that I thought I'm ever going to need from accessibility. I mean, you can do things like make text larger. You can set up the screen so that text appears bolder. You can increase the contrast. You can switch from a light background to a dark background if you need to. You can do something with the color contrast as well. You can do this triple click thing where you touch the thing 3 times and a region of the screen magnifies. But the thing that kept coming back to, and the thing that I started using a lot when my eyes started deteriorating, was this thing where you just do this pinch like that action, that action, and the text will zoom on the page, and you can you can zoom it back out again. It definitely works with the web pages, but it works also with some apps. And another nice thing that they do is you can have there's a thing with the browser where you can get the text version of a page rather than the HTML web page, so that you can just get it. It's rather like reading a word processor document. So that made reading a lot easier, and it started doing all the things I wanted, and it was great. Now there's a couple of other accessibility features which I didn't feel I needed to use, like voiceover and so on, which I think you might, but pretty quickly after realizing that the iPad was working for me, I thought, well, I'd better switch to an iPhone, which has been, with me now for some time, various iPhones. And the Mac, and the main reason I did that is not because they're wonderful accessibility tools. I possibly think that these days, Windows PCs, Windows operating system is probably slightly better for accessibility than the Mac OS, because Windows is a lot more linked in with things like speech. You can use speech to set up a new Windows account, whereas with the Apple, you generally need to get started with something dealing with text on a screen. But the thing was that once I discovered the iPad, it had to be Apple all the way, because these things integrate nicely and work very well together. And I found myself much more comfortable about doing things, because although my eyes are good most of the time, I get these moments when my vision starts to go a bit, and I need to be able to instantly enlarge the screen without thinking about it. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and I would be lost without that. Now, and one of the other things about the Windows, by the way, I was saying how good it is with accessibility. One of the things where it absolutely goes way past anything from Apple is that you can control a Windows computer using just your eyes. You can just look this way and look that way and make things happen. Yeah, I'm not really here to sell Apple, and I mean, but the thing is that you don't really want to move around between Apple, Android, and Windows. It's much better to find one and stick with it. I've discovered that over the years. The other thing that I've done and I've learned is I make a point now, whenever I get a new app for anything that I'm using, I check it out from an accessibility point of view before I start using it. And if I get wind of something not being great for accessibility, I don't even go there, because there's no point learning something which I may in a year or two not be able to use. And there's some good resources out there with people talking about whether things are accessible or not. it helps to use Google to go and find them. But the best thing I can do is usually find it out myself by just trying it myself and looking for it myself. So that's where I was like 4 or 5 years ago when I first knew I had a problem. Since then, I've done a couple of other things. First thing I've done is I've gone for big screen everything. So my iPad today is this thing, the big iPad Pro, which has got a 12.9 inch screen. And again, big screens just mean I'm always going to be able to see anything, no matter what in front of me. It's just never going to be a problem. This is not the iPhone with the biggest screen, but it's got a big 6-inch screen. And again, I need the big screen. I'm talking to you on my iMac, and that's got a huge 27-inch screen. And I think from an accessibility point of view, when you've got an eye problem and it's not like really serious, the huge screen size it's just not an indulgence. It's actually essential. And I have to tell you, one of the accessibility things that I haven't figured out how to solve is those Google things where you get to a Google thing and it says, prove you are a human, click on all the level crossings or all the traffic lights or whatever. And the problem is a lot of them are quite grainy and you can't enlarge them to see. And the consequence of my macular degeneration is I've lost a bit of contrast in my sight. So if a picture is grainy on one of those Google prove you're human tests, I come across as a robot, and I can't do anything about that one. But in general, I've solved most of the sort of day-to-day problems just by learning how to zoom automatically, and without thinking about it. One of the big problems, one of the perhaps troublesome things for people facing this issue is it can be quite expensive. Big screens are expensive. Apple kit tends to be more expensive than Android or Windows kit. But it's something I've learned over the years is to not actually be too distracted by the price of the actual asking price when you buy equipment in the first place. I mean, obviously, if you just can't afford it, you just can't afford it. But if you can stretch to afford something that's a bit better, that's generally the right thing to do, because we tend to get hung up on how much it costs to buy something, but we don't tend to think in terms of how much it costs you to not have the right equipment. So if I didn't have the right equipment and I couldn't perform a job, I couldn't finish a job, or I couldn't do what I was asked to do, that's going to cost me thousands of dollars. Not buying something which is a bit more expensive generally only costs you a few $100s more. So the very first time I've lost a job, and it has happened to me in the past, because I didn't have the right equipment, it's cost me a lot more than I would have spent had I bought the more expensive equipment. I mean, I know that it does take a lot of money and it can be quite expensive, but relative to the value that you get and relative to what you can earn, the income that you can make from having these things, it's not that bad. If you really are stuck for cash, I would suggest that you'd be better off buying good secondhand gear than buying bad new gear. So to sum up, what I've learned so far about getting ready for accessibility is you need to start thinking about it long before you need it. Because the day that your eyes go funny or whatever, if you don't have the right kit in front of you, you may be cut off from a lot of the world. And the other thing you need to do is you need to think all the time, even if it's not a problem today. You need to think all the time about, will I be able to use this in the future? Will I be use this thing in the future? Will I always be able to use this? Will it always do what I want it to do? And that goes for things like software, phone apps, anything that you use. You need to be asking yourself that all the time. It doesn't matter how healthy and fit and and in good condition you are. Sooner or later, these things are going to catch up with you. We all get old, and bits of our bodies tend to wear out. And I think a lot of people just haven't really got their heads around that, one day accessibility is going to be them. So anything else? Well, yes, the one last thing I would suggest is that make sure that all the bits that you have in your life work nicely together. Because that, again, is another form of accessibility. You don't want to have to learn one set of commands on one device and then move to another device and everything works in a different way. Your brain is going to be busy enough dealing with the information and so on flowing your way that you don't want to be dealing with 2 or 3 different sets of commands and having to remember which one to use where. So, try and go for the most integrated approach to technology you can. And that, my friends, is about all I have to say on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing that information and your story. We're going to take a brief break and get Michelle set up. We are working on the problem with the captions. We're sorry that they're not coming through as they were in the first presentation. If anyone's online, you'll see that we have provided a working link to the captions, which you can see within a web browser. And it looks like they are still working even though they are not being streamed successfully. So we'll just take a quick break and be back in 1 sec. Hello everyone, and we're back with our third presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Tube, an accessibility analyst at NAB. Michelle is joining us from Melbourne and is going to talk about how to train your dragons to be accessibility champions. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm here to talk about how to train your dragons. Do we have anyone from Melbourne? If so, let me know in the live chat session. Let's get started. So who am I? My name is Michelle, identify she and her. I'm a digital accessibility analyst from NAB with focus in the mobile space. I have roughly 2 years experience in a role now, and I'm really passionate about educating others about accessibility through active teaching and believe that a lot of the accessibility challenge that we are facing can be solved by design. So how does this all started? As a team, we are often at capacity and we're not able to fulfill Scrum requests within a due date. So we're thinking, how do we ensure that we're not a single point of failure? If we are sick, does it mean that we're going to block the whole feature? So over the past 2 years, we went from writing every single LE requirements to only need to review requirements that written from the BA, which is mostly perfect. We went from testing every single scenario at a minimum level to enable Scrum testers to test during developments, and we no longer look at a minimum scope. Developers and designers have learned so much, and they're able to call out potential LE issues during inceptions without us even mentioning it. We even include large text automation testing as part of definition of done of a feature. This is all an exceptional achievement, and it wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard either. So dragons, what are we talking about in here? So imagine you have just moved to a new island and the island was deserted, it was full of weed and not really accessible to other parts of the island. Then you realize that your neighbors were dragons, the kind that might have you have afternoon snacks. This is quite similar to joining a new project as an LE consultant. You know no one there and all they know you as a blocker, the troublesome one. They also seems a bit scary and doesn't seem to be receptive to change. So what would you do? Would you run away? Or would you see what you can do about it? Often when we talk about dragons, the first thing that comes into mind is dragons with the mouth wide open and have fire coming up. And it's a fairly common misconception that they are scary and all they want to do is destroy everything. But dragons can also be friendly, just like one of those really many dragons in How to Train Your Dragons movie. They're friendly, they're supportive, they're resilient, and maybe they can save you in critical times. So, who is the dragons? It could be a business analyst, it could be a developer, it could be designers, or it could be a testers. They may look like a dragon and seem scary to approach to start with, but they are not scary at all. When you provide the right amount of support, encouragement, and help, it will actually make your job a lot easier, and they are our allies. So now we have identified our potential helpful dragons. Where and how should we start tackling this? When I started as an LA analyst, I find that learning LA testing and writing requirements are not as hard as you think. Just dive in and do it and just keep on asking the question whenever I'm not so sure. Then one day my brain just kind of get it, know how to do it. So I'm thinking if I'm able to do that without knowing anything about accessibility at all before, that shouldn't be that hard for others as well. So to begin with, I'll suggest start engaging with your business or school team and see whether they are interested to learn about accessibility. And if they do, that's already a big win. So what's next? Business analysts and tester are playing one of the most critical roles within a feature. BA helps to define a feature requirement while testers ensure a product meets the requirement. To ensure that feature is accessible, they are your biggest ally to help you to achieve that. So we can start with teaching the BAs how to write accessibility requirements. To start with, you can provide them with some requirements page for references. That could just be general requirements for accessibility, or it could be something that's more specific to a certain components. I'm trying to encourage them to have a go writing it as well, instead of just get them to copy and paste the answer. Those requirement pages are not only for the business analyst, but for everyone within the Scrum team that you're working with. It is an excellent way to communicate to everyone what the expectations are. And if your BAs are interested in doing early kickoff and walkthroughs, that's even better. Provide them with a checklist so that we don't miss anything. Most of the time, we also learn by doing it, and it's the same for LE testing as well. To teach a tester to do accessibility testing, just show them how you do it and what you usually test for and look for. Provide them with a list of scenario and test cases so that it's easier for them to verify when they don't have the knowledge built up yet. Encourage them to ask questions whenever they're not so sure about, and this is how you learn by asking. And after that, don't forget to set a regular catch up with the BAs and the tester and see how they're going. So once they've learned a little bit more about accessibility, don't stop. Don't just stop there. As we mentioned earlier, we can have those weekly sessions with them if they have any questions. And during those regular catch-up, these are the best time for them to shine and progress and put their knowledge into action. You can show them how you usually do your day-to-day roles, such as testing or writing requirements. And while doing so, remember to explain your thought process. For me, I find that that's the most effective way for someone to learn. Remember to start on the small part of the job, then add more parts into it. And if you have a multi-step job that you need to train them, start with the first step, then have them repeat it. And as they progress, add another one, then another. And once they see the process from the beginning to the end, they will have it down without a problem. And if they come up to you asking you a question, turn the question around and ask them how do they think they should handle it? How do you think that is the answer? We should always have them to try to guess a solution and then correct them if that's incorrect. So now we have the tester and BA on board, and they have learned a little bit more about accessibility now. How do we get the developers and designers on board as well? What should you do when you two don't speak the same language? How do we break the barriers? Often we have conflicts with designers and developers around how a certain component or screen behavior should be. Do we have to announce it? Do we have to scale it? I don't really like it. During the collaboration, it might be hard to get idea across if you two don't speak the same language. Everyone has some form of common language, and sometimes it's easy to find, sometimes it maybe not. Most of the time in learning accessibility, the learning itself wasn't the hard part. However, the hard bit is really getting to understand the importance of accessibility when building a product and how it will impact users' experience if a product is not accessible. So how do we help them to understand that? For example, when we're doing design review with designers, you might find a component that might not be accessible for all users. Don't say, just change it, but instead telling them the reason why it might not be a good idea and provide them with alternative solutions. Usually they will understand it and they probably won't make the same mistakes again. Also have a clear do's and don'ts design tips that will help them when creating designs in the future. And similar for developers, instead of just shutting them down completely, try to understand from their perspective and collaborate to look for the best solutions. Usually the best idea comes from collaboration. And finally, don't forget to cater your trainings to what they prefer. There could be cases that you have to resort to different methods to get your points across. So here are the takeaways. To get everybody on board and train everyone to be an ally champion is not easy. However, that wasn't hard as well. So remember to identify who are your dragons, teach them by showing and explaining your thought process whenever you can, provide them with resources and material so that they can always refer back to it. When you think that you have done it, continue doing it, don't stop. Don't ever stop collaborating with your Scrum, with your team. Usually the best idea comes from collaboration. And think about how you start learning accessibility and teach them the same way back. And I would like to end this with today's talk with a funny image. So the image description are, there are a couple of fruits with speech bubbles, where carrots say, we are rooting for you, beets say, we'll beat okay, avocados say, we've got this. And within these difficult times, it's not easy to do all this without talking to each other face to face. However, keep training your dragons and teach them all you got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I love that analogy of dragons and how you entice them over to the accessibility side. I think that's great. We're just going to take a brief break. We seem to have lost our next presenter, so it might be slightly longer than previous while we get them back online. We'll see you soon.
Hello.
Hey, David.
Yes, hello, how you going?
Good, thanks. Good to see you back.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a mask at a computer shutdown as usual in Sydney. It's quite common.
No problems.
Just get my presentation ready.
Fantastic. David, I'm just going to take one tick because we did lose our live captions in our Zoom stream, although they were still available in the web browser. But it looks like they might be back. Yes, they are back. So we're all good to go. Are you good to go?
Thank you very much. I'm ready to go.
Fantastic. I'll leave you to it. It's my pleasure to introduce David Brady, CEO of Here For You and Chairperson of Deafness Forum of Australia. David joins us from Sydney to talk about online communication access challenges for Australians with a hearing loss during COVID-19. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. I'll start and set the scene. I'm wearing a mask and I'm going to play this video. And
Hi, David. I'm just going to interject. Did you share your system audio?
yes.
Okay. I can't hear it.
Oh, okay. Use the captions.
I was going to say, we've got the caption, so it's all good. Awesome. I'll leave.
Okay, hold on. Okay, thank you very much. Decided to wear a mask, my apology. Thank you to all the health workers and everyone wearing a mask. It is essential at this time, an era of coronavirus, as well as in normal health settings. We are seeing a change, a massive, unprecedented change across the world in terms of people wearing masks for their own protection, and also not just masks, but visors, gloves, and all sorts of things to protect essentially our frontline workers. I just want to point out that 3.5 million Australians have a hearing loss, and it's around 240 million around the world have a hearing loss. So what we're seeing is a real challenge for a lot of Australians and people around the world with a hearing loss like myself, who wear a hearing aid. Look, most of us do lip read, we use our devices. A lot of our communications is through visual. We can see the cues, you can see eyeballs, you can see the mouths, you see the wrinkles. All those things are very, very important. But when you put a barrier, and that barrier between the health worker and yourself as someone with a hearing loss is actually quite difficult. It doesn't matter if you've also used sign language. If you've used Auslan, ASL, BSL, whatever sign language in your own country. The other challenge is with the sign language, you can't see the medical person. The other challenge that people forgot about is if there were suspected cases of COVID-19, or even if you're going to a GP, you can't bring an interpreter in the room. You cannot bring a family member in the room. Even if an interpreter wants to come in the room, they'll also think about their personal safety. Even if a family member or a friend to come in the room, they'll think about personal safety as well. And with the health authorities are trying to cut down on the number of people getting infected, that becomes another barrier. So what are we going to do about it? Well, you got the mask. They can use the old pen and paper. Some people and some organisations have tried using masks with a clear shield. That's really tough because most times, most days, especially my own personal experience, going to COVID-19 clinic to have tested, which I have been tested negative, I'm pleased to say, they don't have time to take the mask off, to readjust, to run around to a desk, to do something, to accommodate someone who has a hearing loss, or someone who has another language other than English. So we have to think what else is out there. And the most important thing that we have today is everyone has their phone, everyone has a tablet, everyone has Wi-Fi. So we got to look at using those things about, well, okay, what else we have? We have video relay. We can use FaceTime on your phones. They could be used as video relay interpreters. They are happening. We can use, in this case, live captioning from a third-party captioner. We can have that arranged before we go to clinic. Or we can look at the next step, live automated captioning on the phones, on your tablets. Those things are starting to come into play and are really, it's starting to come in and get understanding within the health departments. The biggest challenge is not actually the actual health workers on the ground. It's actually authorities. State governments, federal governments, and health society have this rule or ruling about people using Wi-Fi's in hospitals or using internet or 5G, 4G on their phones. There has to be a way around that. It has to be proved. I think it's a misunderstanding, concerned about interference with systems and all of that. So that's another challenge. So what we're doing in the moment is we're kind of having a rebel movement where we're actually using our phones and we're walking in and say, can we use it? We find the health workers behind the mask saying, yeah, please go for it. But the real challenge we also face is there is no perfect system yet. And the challenge out there for anybody out there, if you look at the figures, 3.5 million Australians with a hearing loss, around 240 million with a hearing loss around the world. COVID-19 has changed the game in terms of health. We will see masks being used in health professionals until the day we have effective treatments for COVID-19 or a vaccine. Who knows? What we know is probably a year off. It could be 2 years. It could be forever. But right now, we have to make a change in the way that health services see people with a hearing loss, and also those with a language other than English. And that's why we're trying to use those captions and things on your phones. What's the other thing that's interesting is how do we, so we can talk about, I talked about getting the captions on the phones and all that. One of the other challenges I find, and what's really interesting, is time. A COVID-19 test or something going to COVID to hospital for emergency, you will not have time to go make a booking for an interpreter or to make a booking for a live captioner. You have your phone device, but what happens if you run out of batteries? So how else we do? Or how do we arrange to have the right service instantly at your fingertip? How do we know the right app is acceptable to both the health worker and to the patient, which is the person with a hearing loss, and even their family members? So there's little things there. Just, I can see everyone out there ticking away about their ideas. What happens if there was an app that could be used worldwide? They can press a button, it goes to suppliers and alerts them, and then they can use that in the hospital. In those countries or places where internet or even the use of a tablet or a phone is not available, what about the big corporations and organisations donating tablets and phones to those hospital shop fronts, the healthcare shop fronts? And not just healthcare, but general practice clinics, flying doctor services, Médecins Sans Frontières, all of those services around the world. Because hearing loss does discriminate between the rich and the very, very poor. It actually doesn't pick, like COVID-19, it doesn't pick a group of people who have a hearing loss. It affects everybody. But they're the little things that we got to start thinking about when trying to build that. So at the moment, it is clunky, but we in Australia are trying to work out small ways to make it happen. Because we know that it's not just about the deaf person or the person with hearing loss kind of benefit. It is every essential health worker. Because one of the most important things that people need to remember, when people are in stress, they're trying to find out about something about their own personal health, communications is key. Because without proper communications, if that barrier is down, the level of stress goes up, not just for the person with a hearing loss, but for all the health and frontline workers. And that's why we need to look at real solutions going forward. I've seen some other solutions, like people say, well, we can't carry the phone on with the gloves. Maybe someone look at a necklace around and carry it around the equipment. We live in a new generation of innovation age, and smart, clever, and effective. We've got the power of the internet, we've got the power of 5G, we've got the power of a handheld computer in your hand. So I put that challenge to you all. I really look forward to it. I wish I had the money and the technology to make it happen, but we do have the technology to somehow get through. If we can really break that barrier, we're talking a lot of people that are going to have a great benefit. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you for the captioner, really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please ask, find me on LinkedIn. It's Dave Brady, CEO, here for you. Dave Brady's on my screen. And yeah, enjoy the rest of our discovery of innovation technologies that will definitely change lives, not just for everybody, but more importantly, for people who need accessibility on this great day of global accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for that. I can already see a few minds ticking away from our chat channel, and you've, yes, you've definitely inspired a few people to think more about this, and also, you know, not having thought necessarily how this has had more recent impacts. So thanks so much for that, Dave.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Wonderful, thanks. We will take a short break as we get Scott set up and be back in just a sec.
Thank you.
Welcome back to A11y Bytes 2020. We're here with Scott, who is our fifth presenter. I'd like to introduce Scott Cabot, Solutions Specialist at Tapto. Scott's actually joining us from Adelaide to talk about his impressions of the Microsoft Adaptive Controller as a user and a developer. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. Yeah, today will be my first lightning talk and actually my first virtual presentation ever for A11y Bytes. So I appreciate having the opportunity to present today. As mentioned, this will be actually a hands-on demo. So for those of you who can see, of the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. And basically what it will hopefully do is highlight my first evening with this device as a developer. It was also as a user, but it turns out 10 minutes is not very long. I was listening to the pre-show and to the other presenters that may be watching. Thank you for enjoying my talk title, but there'll be no more Let's Get Physical puns because there's just absolutely no time today. So for those of you who don't know me, I now do full stack development in Adelaide here for a company called Tapto. I just wanted to thank them for purchasing the technology that I'm using for today's demo. Professional development can be very expensive, both financially and in terms of time. And so to have an employer that lets me do this sort of thing is really valuable because it gives me opportunities to speak in front of a large audience like today. Before I worked for Tapto, I had experience in the games and interactive entertainment industry. I'm responsible for 6 apps on the various app stores, mostly self-published, but I did work as part of a larger team for Trucks Off-Road. I guess, you know, no one has time these days. Since I've changed role, I don't tend to work on games very much anymore. They definitely don't get finished. But I do spend most of my time on personal projects working on games. And what I'm really interested in at the moment is how we can bake accessibility in from the ground up. Many advocates will tell you that accessibility is easy. I think accessibility can be very expensive, especially if you're a solo developer like myself or a hobbyist who does it for the joy of making something and not necessarily for making money. So when you do want to bake in accessibility, you want it to be pragmatic. You want your users to get something out of it, but you actually want to release your game. There's no point in having an accessible game that no one plays, right? That's not good for anybody. So that's sort of where today's talk will be going and why I'm interested in technology like the adaptive controller. So for those of you that don't know what it is, it's actually quite a sizable unit. The pictures don't do it justice. And despite it being called the Microsoft Adaptive Controller, it actually acts more like a hub. So this is actually all you get in the box, what I'm holding. There's some 3.5mm jacks along the back that let you plug in peripherals and also some USB ports on the side. So sorry, just making sure I'm using my right microphone because I never checked that. So by itself, this is not really a super useful piece of kit, right? You need other things with it. And so I'll also be using the Logitech Adaptive Gaming Kit. So this is a byte switch and this is a digital button to do my demo today. And even with these two pieces of kit, you're still sort of missing something. There's still no joystick here. So playing games with a few $100s worth of hardware purchase still isn't quite enough. So if you are a user and you're interested in getting one, just be aware that there might be a bit of financial outlay for you to get into gaming with this. But as a developer, what do I want to know about this device? I want to know that I do have some options and what those options are. What are my boundaries? What am I constrained to? If I want to make a bespoke product, does this device do something really cool and unique that I can maybe leverage? Or is it just an Xbox One controller? You know, how smart are the ports on the back here? Can I just throw any peripheral at it and get some sort of input? Or am I constrained to some really specific guidelines? And so this really short hands-on demo today attempts to highlight that and basically work through some of the things that I did on my first night with the device. So of course, the best way to test any device is to just use it. And if I'm showing the right screen, hopefully you can see my demo. If not, please shout out, Sarah. What I tend to do when I make a demo is I come up with a fictitious parallel universe and some situation that I need to solve for. It helps me give constraints to my problem solving and helps me understand that constraint better. Now, of course, because it's an alternate universe, I also make myself super successful. So in this alternate universe, I've got the #1 selling game on Steam, because why not? And I've had a user come to me and say, Scott, your game is amazing. It's probably going to be game of the generation. But I'm having trouble playing it because I'm using the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. And specifically, my problem is that I'm trying to jump. I'm using the A button, and pushing on this button is very hard for me. This action is difficult. What I would like to do is actually squeeze the button, but this button's very thin and I really have to, it's too hard to hold. All right. So what I would actually like to do is use this spare byte switch that I have. This is a nice, big, sizable byte switch. I can pull on this and that would be better for me. I've tried doing it myself and I'm not getting the input that I expect from the game. Could you help me out? Of course I can help out. That sounds like a fantastic use of my time. So I go away and I acquire the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. And as a developer, I start playing around. So the first thing I do is make sure that the A button actually works, right? We have an A button here on the face of the device. So I'm going to push it and I get my input. So that's it, talk's over. Not really, but that works, right? That's really good. I also have a 3.5mm jack on the back that I can use to simulate the A input. And I'm going to start by using a button purely because my button is going to mimic what's on the face of this controller. So I plug my button in, I press the button and I get input. I mean, I would expect that, right? This should work out of the box, but maybe for my game, it doesn't. So I now know that the input is behaving the way I would expect it to behave. So let's get down to business and actually check out the byte switch. That's the important piece here. And now I've hit my first roadblock. So that might look promising. I've got some input coming up on the screen. I'm not actually holding my byte switch down. So my user's plugged in their byte switch and their character is just jumping all over the screen, right? They're having a real hard time playing my game. Maybe they can't grab some of the collectibles. So this is a problem. This is something that I have to deal with. So what are my options? What can I do here? I do have 2 extra jacks on the Xbox One adaptive controller that is not on an Xbox One controller, and they're labeled X1 and X2. Depending on what consumer-facing documentation you read, the language will be different, but ostensibly it boils down to this idea that the X1 and X2 controllers ports take both analog and digital input, and as you can see here, they can be assigned to any controller button, command, or thumbstick direction. Well, my user wants to press A. That is a controller button. Maybe I can do something here. Maybe this is my silver bullet. So what I've gone and done is I've used the Xbox Accessories app that's available on Xbox and on Windows, and I've created a custom profile, and I've mapped the A button to the X1 port on my adaptive controller. I'm just going to double check that the face button still works, and it does. I'm going to just double check my button because my button worked in the A port, so it should also work here in the X1 port, and it does. Now, if I'm lucky, I'll plug this in and everyone will cheer and life will be good. Doesn't work. I get nothing. This is sort of frustrating as a developer now. I have two different ports that give me two different types of output, and neither of them are the one that I want, right? So this is a bit perplexing. And as a developer, I'm not going to stand for that. I need to know why something doesn't work. So of course I go back to Google. You know, I think any self-respecting developer loves Google. And I stumble across the Xbox Adaptive Controller Input Device Specification. This is the document that third-party companies would use to make a peripheral that is compliant with the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. And if you scroll through it, there's, you know, tons of diagrams on how to make switches and do all that sort of stuff. But the salient piece of information is here in the thumbsticks section. There are two jacks labeled X1 and X2 that are intended for devices with two channels of analog data, such as the X and Y axes of a thumbstick or a joystick. However, digital buttons, button devices will be interpreted as alternate digital buttons when connected to these ports. So this has actually answered my question, right? The X1 and X2 ports, while they accept both analog and digital input, they're not a catch-all port. In fact, they're designed specifically, really, for joysticks in the event that you can't plug them in to USB. So knowing that, I don't think there's much I can do at the software level for my user now. So what does that mean for me? And I guess by extension, what can you learn and what does that mean for you? You actually have a bit of a double-edged sword here. What's great about this as a developer is that, perhaps unsurprisingly, this is an Xbox One controller. So if I want to push a digital button, for example, the A button, which would be the green button on an Xbox One controller, an Xbox 360 controller, I also need to plug in a digital peripheral, right? There is no way around it. This port only accepts digital input. It's not entirely true for analog input. I could plug in a digital switch, but I'd probably have sort of a lessened user experience because I have less values to play with. But it means that if as a developer, I test my game with an Xbox One controller, it will just work out of the box for this. That's pretty cool. The downside though, is if you just want to make something that targets this, maybe you're making a niche product for medical rehabilitation and this is the hardware you want to use, you don't have a lot of control at the software level to do cool stuff, right? The controller is just going to give you input and you sort of have to deal with it. That means you have to invest in custom hardware. Now, accessibility is not just physical, it's also financial. As a business owner, I might not be able to afford to make custom hardware. My user who's emailed me and said, I want to use this byte switch and it doesn't work, I now have to tell them to go buy a new byte switch with digital input. They might have spent their month's free money on my game. So now they can't play anything, right? They have to go back to something else. So accessibility can be expensive. And this is a fantastic device, but it won't do everything for you. So if you are a developer, do some research before you pick it up and make sure it will do the things you want it to do. So given that I'm a minute and 36 seconds over, we'll wrap it up there. That's a really shallow dive into the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. I think it's a really cool piece of tech, but just do some reading before you buy it to make sure that it's right for you. If you're interested in learning more about the controller, some of the things I do or accessibility in general, please hit me up at iam@scott.cab if you prefer email, or of course, you can always tweet at me or DM me at iamscottcab on Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was absolutely fascinating for me in particular. I love the device, but it's great to see, I guess, where you've found the limitations of the device and highlighting some of those and some of the other things like financial implications. Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll take a brief break. A brief break. It's obviously getting a bit late for me here. While we get Alistair set up.
that look good?
That's looking fantastic, Alistair. Looks like you're all set up.
Yep.
Wonderful. All right, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Alistair Somerville, Director of Acuity Design. Alistair joins us actually from the UK and is going to be talking about how to think about cognitive accessibility. Over to you, Alistair.
Okay. Thank you. And yes, it's just 8:15, well, 8:30ish here in the UK. Right, this is a talk called PIAF, and my name's Alistair Somerville, and I can be found very easily on Acuity Design, where mostly everything I do appears. Now, the starting point of any talk about cognitive accessibility should be the best resource I know, which is the Cognitive and Learning Disabilities Accessibility Task Force at the w3.org. Use them as the basis of any work. Their explanations of what different forms of cognitive impairment are is extraordinarily helpful. So start there. The talk I'm going to give is about getting lost and the cognitive issues there of wayfinding and wayshowing, because my experiences are in physical design and digital design, in physical spaces like museums, but also certainly nowadays in virtual reality spaces. And this is about how does the cognitive accessibility and the design that we provide work for the users that we are trying to guide and trying to help them find their way through the spaces. Now, PIAF is an acronym, and it stands for Perceivable, Intelligible, Actionable, and Fallible. And I'm going to take you through each of the four elements, because these are the four elements of the way in which you can check back quickly that the design you're creating, following the COGAC rules offered by W3C, that the things you're doing actually work for users. So, number one, and this is fundamental to all accessibility, perceivable. Information open to the sensory capacities of the user. At the most basic level, this is the continuing problem on the internet of so many blank spaces. All these spaces where alt text should be. And in wayfinding, this is a huge issue. When you do this sort of thing, and going back to David's talk about use of sign language, if you are going to create an information environment, you need to ensure that the pieces, all the elements, are available to people whichever sense that they use. You have to work to the capacities of people. So if things are missing, then people get lost because you've only given them half the map. The second part is intelligible, and this is probably the crucial aspect and the crucial difference in cognitive accessibility is intelligibility. Information comprehensible to the user and their cognitive capacities. This isn't about design teams and what they think things means. This is about users and what users think things mean. I just want to give you one example which came out in 2015. A man was trying to help his mother set up Skype, and he was trying to guide her through the setup of the camera and microphone. And so he was trying to describe the experience, and there was the symbols, and the symbols exist on the screen. And for people who can see the screen here, it's the standard symbology for camera and microphone as used in many, many online talk systems. However, when he talked to his mother and they were talking on the phone, he said, "Can you tell me what you can see on the screen?" And she said, "I can see a hot water bottle and a dentist's chair." And if you do look at the camera symbol and the microphone symbol in that sense, you really do understand what she was getting at. Because the point is, it was her intelligibility which matters. Now, one of the things which, again, is a very good piece of advice is whenever you're doing symbols, whenever you are offering a way of saying this is the meaning we're trying to say, then offering alternative ways of clarifying the meaning, clarifying what the hell it is you're trying to say. So putting the word camera and putting the word microphone underneath the symbols would have helped, because that would have clarified the intelligibility to the person. And this is, again, how user testing is so important. Checking that what you think seems intelligible is intelligible with a broad range of people. Offhand, and also I'd like to point out at the bottom of this tweet, which is the original tweet when he was speaking, Paul Annett was speaking to his mother, it's worth pointing out that at the bottom you can see it was December the 25th, 2015. I feel there is a certain amount of stress around Christmas, and there's nothing like stress and Christmas to impair cognition for all of us. So people get lost if you don't check that they know what the map means. Always check. Actionable, information enabling user action to meet their intent without distraction. People need to be able to do the thing that they want to do. Now, this symbol here, the hamburger menu, which I've just brought up here, when one app was updated, the hamburger menu was used. However, the alt text, and a friend of mine noticed this, the alt text only actually said hamburger. So whenever the person was using this, blind user was using this app, all that happened was the system would shout hamburger. He had no idea what to do. He was not able to take action. And that was a really huge error. You need to ensure the person can do the thing they want to do. People get lost if your map doesn't help them make the journey that they were wanting to make. And finally, fallible. Information that anticipates system failure and enables backtracking. One of the things which has been coming up in some of the digital wayfinding is the use of beacons to guide people through, say, underground stations, metro stations, where there's no GPS. Now, of course, that means that all your beacons need to work and your app needs to be utterly reliable in order to be able to gain the route. But what happens if your infrastructure fails? What happens if the person finds themselves with a broken technology, with a broken map? How do they backtrack? How do they recover their independence using their capacities at that moment? And you have to test for this. And this is a very important one in wayfinding systems, both physical and virtual. People get lost if your map is taken away without warning. What do you do? So that's the four things, but I just need to finish up by saying something quite important, which is the way in which we talk about PF, the way in which we talk about this checking of things. Most people talk about it as though each element is separate. So, you know, if something's not perceivable, then frankly, none of the system is perceivable. It doesn't matter what your information is if nobody can perceive it in the first place. But that doesn't mean that if something perceivable but still not intelligible is better, because again, they can't take action, they can't deal with it when it goes wrong. It's not true. If something's not intelligible, then its perceivability is just wasting a person's time. You're just distracting a person with useless information. And this becomes true all the way through. If you can't take action with the information, then frankly, why have you wasted the person's time by making it perceivable and intelligible? And the final element of if you haven't thought about what happens when things go wrong, I have to say the majority of technology is designed currently with the idea of perceivable, intelligible, and actionable. And the idea of fallibility is something that we really need to think more about. Because again, if it's not there, if we haven't planned for it, then really the system shouldn't exist. Provide the full map, support the whole journey. PF is just a way of framing the questions that you think about when you're creating a system, when you're testing the systems, that use W3C regulations at the base. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alistair. I know actually quite a few people had asked for an A11y Bytes presentation this time on cognitive accessibility. So it's perfect that you submitted a proposal, and I know there's a lot of people out there that do want to learn more about this space.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So we'll take a brief break. It might be slightly longer than normal. We are missing a presenter. So just bear with us a tick and we'll come back soon. Hey, Preeti, we can see you on video.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope I am not too late.
No, no, all good. Don't mind.
Okay.
Okay.
So, am I, looking correct? Do I need to adjust the camera or anything? Would need your inputs.
It was a little bit better before. It's cutting off the top of your head a little bit.
Is it better now?
That is perfect.
Okay, just give me a moment. And do I have time, or should I zoop start?
If you wanted to share your slides, then we can get you started.
Okay, just give me a second. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
We can now see your slides as well, yes.
Okay, thank God. Okay, those are the hurdles every time, especially being a visually impaired. It just, it makes me nervous for a while, and then I should be good.
No problem at all. I know how you feel. I was actually pretty nervous before this this whole thing because we've never done a live streamed event like this. So I'm right there with you.
Okay, so it makes two of us. Makes me feel better.
All right, Preeti, I'm going to introduce you to everyone who is listening on the line.
Sure.
Preeti is the Chief Accessibility Officer at Barrier Break. She's actually joining us from India, and she is here to talk about the experience of visually impaired users listening to instructions on the web. Over to you, Preeti.
Hey, Sarah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to different parts of the world. Wishing you all a happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2020. thanks to Sarah and team for, accepting my proposal and giving me an opportunity to come and share my experiences with all of you. And together we all can make accessibility happen. So let's get started, as I have only 10 minutes to share my thoughts. And what I'm going to talk about is the experiences of visually impaired users on the web. This is specifically to, instructions on the web. A quick background. So where I am from, as Sarah said, I'm from India, and I am a Chief Accessibility Officer with Barrier Break. Barrier Break is an accessibility testing, consulting, and documentary mediation company based out of India, and we are the pioneers of accessibility when it comes to India. We started the conversation around accessibility in India almost 2 decades back now, and we were the first to kickstart the conversation, and we are happy to see lots and lots more people joining the conversation, not only in India and across the world. As a company, we are, a mix of quote unquote people with disabilities and people with without disabilities. We, around 60 to 70% of our staff would be people with disabilities, and we give competition to our peers who are not disabled, and it becomes really an interesting challenge and a competition and fun to work together without anybody getting affected with disability, as it does not even matter to any one of us. We just out there to make things accessible, work together, enjoy, and have fun. So moving on to the experiences on the web of a screen reader, a bit of a background of what screen reader is. We all know a screen reader reads out what is the information there on the screen, and it speaks. Believe me, it speaks a lot. It just chirps, chirps, chirps. Thank God, whoever made this screen reader also thought of giving us a control so we can silence it. And we can just press the control key, to give you an example, on a Windows machine to silence it. Otherwise, it will just keep on talking and it will not shut up at all. So it talks about, a control's name, label, its state, value, and also a tutor message. How should I, interact with it? Should I press enter? How do I edit it? How do I select it? And so on. So it becomes, a lot of information. It will do that on the web. It will do that on the desktop. To give you a couple of examples, like when a screen reader speaks, how does it speak? Here are a few snippets. So on the desktop, for example, if I am on the desktop, my focus is on the desktop, it will say folder view, list view, the name of the item which has focus, for example, recycle bin, and it is 1 out of 78. And it will not stop there. It will also tell me, okay, if you want to edit your selection, press F2, or if you want to move between the items, you can use your arrow keys. Let's understand how does it read out on the web. As soon as the page loads in a browser, it starts reading the title of the page. And from there, it will give me a summary, a count of key elements on the page. These include headings, links, images, tables, frames, etc. So if you are with a screen reader running, if you are on a Barrier Break website homepage, it will say home, Barrier Break, blah, 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 the entire title, followed by, the page has 2 regions, 20 headings, and 51 links. That is some information. And this we listen as screen reader users day in and day out. So quickly moving on to Many of us would believe that's too much of information. Yes, I agree. And I've been listening to it for the past 19 years, from the day when I started using a screen reader. So yes, we have customization options. I can customize. Most screen readers, whether Windows, on the mobile, on the Mac environment, Android, TalkBack, VoiceOver, every screen reader will give you options to customize. The verbosity. How much verbose information do you need from a screen reader? You can set it to either high, medium, low. People who are starting to use a screen reader, they will usually sit at high. Those who are, 3 to 4 years, 5 years into using a screen reader would sit on medium, and beyond that, they will want just the name. They know what to do. They will just want the state. They might not want all the other information. I know how to interact. I know how to do what. So that's where a screen reader stands. When we talk about instructions on the web, instructions on the web will include, a web page elements, name, role, state, value. Yep, needed. I need to know what's the name, what is it, how can I interact, and what's its state. If it is already selected, I don't want to deselect it. To go along with it, nowadays with accessibility, getting its awareness is spreading. So developers, web page authors, designers, content writers, they're trying to include instructions. Yes, include them, but don't include too much instructions, because then it adds up to the listening. Too much instructions, and the instructions that have been added by a developer cannot be customized. The instructions that a screen reader adds by default for a different type of elements can be customized. So that leaves us with zero control. We have no choice but to listen to all those instructions. So here are a couple of examples of instructions on the web and how I or any other screen reader user will feel about it. I'm dealing with a video player and I'm on the play button. It will tell me play, that's the name. Yes, I need it. It will tell me it's a button. Yes, I know. If it is a button, then what I need to do. That's all good. It's good thus far. Then it tells me click to play the video. So how does the screen reader speak this? Play, click to play the video, button. Now that's understood. I know if I'm dealing with a video player and I am on the play button, then activating it would play the video. I don't need that instruction. It's redundant. It just adds up to my listening. Another one, a search input field. Search, I know I want the label. Edit, I want to know the role. Then it tells me type a keyword to search and press enter to submit. Again, it's a search, it's an input field, so I know I can type. But when you are adding such instructions on the web, you're putting doubt in the minds of user. Can I use it on the mobile? There's no enter key on the mobile. People are browsing through different devices today. It's not only the traditional desktops and laptops. People are browsing on the web, on the go, on their watches, on the phones, and the interaction is different. It's not only enter, it's touch. And thus, such instructions should be avoided. What needs to be done? Minimize the instructions. Add the instruction only when they are needed. Don't repeat the information that is not needed. Let me enjoy the web. Don't make it too verbose, because listening to verbose information, verbose instructions, makes me drive crazy. Spending hours on the web on a daily basis and listening to these instructions on, almost every alternate web page just makes the cognitive load for a visually impaired user very, very high. And by the end of the day, it becomes too difficult, to want to listen anything, not even music. A soothing music will also not help us. So how should we write instructions on the web? Keep them precise. Don't repeat information about a control's name, role, state, value. Don't tell me how do I have to navigate. If it is a standard interaction, I know how to navigate. If there is some customization, then it should be. So how do we decide whether it is needed or not? The best option is to check, test it with a native screen reader user. And they would advise you, this is what I know, this is what I understand, this is not needed. This will improve the overall user experience for visually impaired users and reduce their cognitive load. Together, we all can enjoy web and make it a delightful experience for people with visual impairments as well. Yes, accessibility is needed, but excessive accessibility can make it really, difficult or not a pleasing experience for sure for someone who is knowing things and who wants to just use the web and not being educated for the same thing again and again. If you have any questions, you all can reach out to me. My Twitter handle is Preeti Rora, and you can write to me at preeti.rora@barrierbreak.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. So did I. Let's make accessibility happen and spread the love for accessibility. Happy GAD once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Preeti, and happy GAD to you too.
Happy GAD, Sarah. Thank you.
Not a problem. I listened to your presentation and I'm reminded of a line I've used before, which is killing the screen reader user with kindness.
Yes, I agree, but I didn't want to use those words.
No, well, I'm not on the receiving end of this. So.
Yes, and we want people to make accessibility. I don't want to, scare them like, they are doing it all wrong. They are doing it right, but they need to balance it out.
No problem at all. Well, thank you.
Hope I was in time.
Yes,
and I
yes.
didn't overshoot it. Okay.
No, you're all good. So we are going to take a brief break for those listening into the live stream and get our next presenter, Rachel, set up.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hey, Rachel, would you like to share your screen now? I can see your video.
Hi.
Hey.
You see that?
And I have your slides. That's perfect.
Great.
Fantastic. All set?
Yep.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. That was a nice quick changeover. I would next like to introduce Rachel Morgan Trimmer, who is Managing Director at Sugar Cat Publishing. Rachel also joins us from the UK and is going to talk about 10 easy things everyone can do to be accessible. Over to you, Rachel.
Hello. This is the McDonald's fries of accessibility tips. They're quick, they're easy, and they're cheap. And hopefully, unlike McDonald's fries, they won't give you a heart attack. So these accessibility tips are They're mainly for people with special needs or conditions or disabilities, but like a lot of accessibility tips, they're actually useful for everybody. So that's my talk title, 10 Stupidly Easy Things You Can Do to Be Accessible. My name is Rachel Morgan Trimmer, and my company is sparkleclass.com, and I work as a neurodiversity coach and consultant. What that means is if you want your workplace to be inclusive to neurodiverse staff, those with ADHD or autism or dyslexia, I can help you do that, and it's worth doing because we're 30 to 50% more productive. And if you are neurodiverse and you want to take your career to the next level, or you want to get your business started or to grow your business, I can help you do that as well. And I have ADHD and autism as well, so I know where you're coming from. Let's start with my 10 tips then. Tip 1, tell people what to expect. It's funny, isn't it? At a conference like this or an event, they always tell you what the schedule is. They tell you when things start and when they finish and when the breaks are as well. And it's odd because you don't get that at the theatre, and I'm not quite sure why. So if you don't know when it ends, you don't know when to tell somebody to pick you up, or if you can catch the last train home or whatever. And in my case, not knowing how long it's going to go on for can be quite difficult if the play that you've been to see turns out to be really, really, really bad. Number 2, remember that they don't have your knowledge. What I mean by this is people don't necessarily know the terminology you use, perhaps if you use jargon, and they're not seeing what you see when you're trying to describe something to them. Here's an example. I told my husband to go and get my black shoes, and I knew in my head exactly what shoes I meant. And that's what he saw in the bedroom. My black shoes. Obviously, I meant the middle ones, but without actually conveying more information to him and just sort of imagining that he could see into my mind, it wasn't very helpful. Tip 3, make your information memorable. This gives people much more to sort of hang on to if you're able to tell a story or add something unusual to your presentation or your information or your instructions. This is a picture of a sign that I took in a bar in Cambodia. Now, I needed the toilet, and I could see from the sign that there was going to be a crocodile on the way to the toilet, and that would help me find the way. So it's something interesting and memorable. And I thought it was going to be a picture of a crocodile, maybe a statue of a crocodile or something like that. And it was actually a pit of live crocodiles. So that was certainly memorable. I'm not saying that you have to do anything quite that extreme to help people remember what you want to tell them, but anything unusual, anything a little bit different can help people retain the information you're giving them. Tip 4, use pictures. Now, this is brilliant for dyslexics, and it's also very useful for people who don't speak your first language. This is one of my favorite tips. Put a picture of the door to your building on your website. So when people come and visit, instead of saying, oh, it's just a grey building or it's halfway down the street or this or that, if they actually know what it looks like, it helps them to find it much more quickly. And similarly to that, if there's more than one door, tell them which door, and you can give information about if what floor it's on, and perhaps another couple of pictures, just to help people find that information. And obviously with a sensible and informative and not too long alt tag. Use fewer words. Mark Twain once apologized to somebody for writing them a long letter and said, I did not have time to write you a short one. It's so easy to ramble on, but using fewer words enables people to get the information that they need much more easily. Look at this. This is a letter the UK government sent to every household in Britain. And I have crossed out everything that was unnecessary, and I have highlighted all the information that people actually need, which is basically staying at home unless it's necessary to go out, stay 2 meters apart, and for more information, go to that website. So you can see if you struggle to read or you struggle to extract the salient information, then having all those words just muddles everything for you, and it's much harder to find out what you need to do. Tip 6, listen and listen properly. Autistics like me often don't speak with enough intention. We don't convey the information that makes it sound like it's important. And the same is true for a lot of depressed people as well, or those with other mental health issues. I was having a conversation with my husband the other day, and I'd mentioned something that I said before, and he said, oh, I didn't think it was important. And I said to him, I've got two topics of conversation. One is things that are important, and the other is people that I fancied in the 1980s. So if I'm not talking about Michael Hutchence, it means that what I'm saying is important. Tip 7, know that people might be hiding it. This is fairly common, and by it, I mean their condition or their disability or whatever it might be. We like to fit in. Everybody does, don't they? We like, and people with neurodiverse conditions very often mask their symptoms or their natural behaviours. So we could be hiding it. I was friends with somebody for a year before I found out that they were profoundly deaf. She just got really good at lip reading because she wanted to fit into a hearing world. So if I could know somebody for a year and not pick up that they were deaf, you can see how easy it is for a disabled person or a person with a condition to hide that. This is sort of connected, and this is a really surprising one. Be aware that people might not know what they need. And it's because people with conditions, they don't always understand that other people don't see the world the same way that they do. They don't see things through other people's eyes, and they don't realize that what they experience is not usual. For example, I was well over 30 before I realized I had ADHD and autism. And so one thing you can do to address this is, instead of saying, oh, do you need anything, is tell them what you've got to offer, or offer specific things. So say, oh, there's a quiet room over there, or you can leave any time, we're not going to shut the door. Do you want to sit near the front or near the back? Would you like the volume up or down? Or would you like me to go over that again? So making specific requests not only helps you give that person what they need, but it also helps the person with special needs to actually understand for themselves and clarify for themselves what it is that they actually need. And that's going to help them in the future as well. Number 9, remember that how you create information is not necessarily how it will be received. Now, when I was preparing this lightning talk, I imagine you all listening to it like this, totally focused, hanging on my every word. But I know that the reality is probably more like this. You're probably on your phone, you might be staring out the window, or you might be distracted by somebody who's come in the room, or your cat or whatever. So understanding that people aren't necessarily going to put the same amount of listening or reading into what you're producing as you are, means that you can give the information in sort of small bite-sized chunks and give them those memorable things or pictures or whatever it might be to help them grab the information and retain it and use it as well. And tip 10 is do nothing. Yes, actually doing nothing can be an accessibility tip. And why is that? It's because people like me have always been left out, made to feel different, made to feel like we're a challenge. And when you do nothing, when you treat us like we're normal, we feel welcomed, we feel normal, we feel like we're not a problem, and we feel included. And inclusion is accessibility with bells on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. They were 10 incredible tips that I'm sure everyone can take away and do something about tomorrow.
I hope so. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We will have a brief pause as we get Jerry set up and be back in a sec. Jerry, Sarah here. Just checking if you've shared your video.
Hey, Sarah, I'm having trouble sharing my screen.
Oh, I can see your screen. I just can't see the video.
What are you seeing?
The alley at ABC.
Yeah, so if I look at the controls, I've got start video with a line through it, and I can't activate that for some reason. It said something about going to settings and adjusting something in settings. Video settings, is there something that should be turned on?
Let me check, because I know you came in as an attendee. Request to ask to share video.
Okay, fingers crossed that worked. No. Sorry, Sarah, but it's not allowing me to share my screen or start the video. I'll stop the share and try it again.
Okay. That's the screen sharing up.
Do we have any joy?
No, you look like you've got the same settings as everyone else.
Okay. All right. That's really weird. Okay. Can people see my screen? Is it that they just can't see me?
They just can't see you. So if you're happy to go without a picture, we can definitely hear you and we can definitely see the slides. We've got the alley at ABC up.
Okay, beautiful. Well, I think that not seeing me is probably an advantage for everybody. So, right,
I think so, but thank you for being flexible.
Coming to you literally from cyberspace and without a face. Hi, everyone. My name's Jerry Newstattle, and I'm the Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Lead at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, sometimes called AUNTI or just simply the ABC. So what is media? Media is everything we read, watch, and listen to for news, lifestyle, and entertainment. Did you watch ABC TV last night? I didn't, but that's pretty unusual because I love my ABC and I get to watch, listen, or read it a lot because making sure everyone can understand our media is part of my job. In fact, people tell me I get paid to watch TV. Anyway, let's talk about media accessibility. And more specifically, let's focus on multimedia. That is audio or media that you listen to and video that you watch. So operating media usually means controlling playback with media players. Understanding media usually means hearing or seeing it. But sadly, not everybody can. So what if you can't use the player control buttons? Or maybe you don't have the fine motor controls needed. Maybe you can't use a mouse. Or if you don't know what the controls do because you can't read their labels. And that's an important issue that's facing many people with impaired vision. So what can you do? Make sure your media player is reachable for everyone, that all controls are operable by everyone, however they need to do it. Some people use a mouse, some people tap or swipe, or maybe use voice activation. And make sure all controls are dynamically labeled for everyone, including people who can't see them. And then there's the content. If someone has impaired hearing, they can't hear your sound. So give them captions or maybe a transcript to read. And if they have impaired vision, they mightn't be able to see it or maybe see it clearly. So transcribe or audio describe your video. And who benefits? Your audiences benefit. because your audiences can participate. Everybody can participate. Everyone can watch your video or listen to your audio. And you benefit because you get to reach and influence more people. And it doesn't just help people with disabilities. Getting it right also helps someone who may be older and who may have a shaky wrist, or someone younger who might not yet have sufficient dexterity or might be learning the language. And anyone watching video in noisy or public places or without headphones on a bus, train, or maybe a plane. At the ABC, our audio and video players are accessible. We put a lot of effort and prioritize that a lot. The new Kids app works a treat with voiceover on an iPad, and you can read transcripts for essential podcasts like CoronaCast, that some of you may have been listening to. Built to be accessible from the ground up, Triple J app is scalable and easily switches between portrait and landscape orientations. Listen's complex interactions are screen reader friendly, and on iView, Gardening Australia and many other shows are captioned for people with limited hearing. And there's Auslan translation for important or emergency video. And to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day, our wonderful designers created this awesome video. We are Australian in Auslan. Enjoy.
We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian. We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australian.
Oh man, I just love that. I don't know about you, but I was sitting here bopping away in my chair listening to it. It's awesome. Anyway, captioning video is great for people with limited hearing, but it doesn't help sight impaired audiences who want to watch visually rich drama, documentaries, current affairs, kids, and lifestyle shows like Gardening Australia. Watching TV is helping many of us get through coronavirus. And starting the 1st of July, we're introducing audio description to broadcast TV to complete the picture for Australians with impaired vision. Watch this card and chime at the start of all audio described shows from the 1st of July or in your program guide.
The following program is audio described for viewers who are vision impaired.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Newstattle. I'm the Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Lead at the ABC. Contact me by email, LinkedIn, Twitter. Just get in touch and say g'day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I have to say I've watched that ABC video a few times today and also saw it when we were practicing, and it gives me chills every time. So I'm like you, I love watching it. All right, we will take a brief pause as we get Julie set up and be back soon.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Jerry. Hello, Julie. Oh, Julie, I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, you have turned that massive microphone on and we can now hear you loud and clear.
I was worried before that everyone would hear my dogs barking, so I turned it off and then I forgot that I turned it off.
Oh, well, at least, you know, it was an easy flick of the switch, so that's all good.
That's what we like in a technical problem.
Absolutely, yes. And after having a few at the start of today's A11y Bytes stream, I am happy that it is just a flick of a switch. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Grundy, Digital Accessibility Consultant at Intopia. Julie is joining us from Perth, and she is going to talk about how you can animate your content using CSS techniques.
Cool, well, I will get started. Sarah tells me that everyone can see my slides, so I'm just going to trust that that's the case. So what I'm going to talk about today is web animation, specifically animating your interfaces of your websites and your web apps. The problem that we have in accessibility, well, it's not a problem. The goal of our accessibility work is to make sure that people who have vestibular disorders and attention deficit disorders aren't bothered by any animation that we add to an interface. If you're new to accessibility or you're not aware of this particular issue, people with vestibular disorders can often have like a kind of severe motion sickness that's caused by moving and zooming content, which happens a lot with parallax scrolling and all of these nifty, trendy things that are happening with web animation. And when we've got repetitive looping things, people with attention disorders can often find it very difficult to focus on the actual task that they came to the website to do. So we want to make sure, as accessibility professionals and people who care about this, we want to make sure that we're not harming people with the animation of our web interfaces. The problem we face in our everyday work is that accessibility is cool, animation is cool, and everybody wants to put it on their website and nobody wants to have an uncool website. That would be awful. Accessibility has a slight image problem. People tend to think that it must be boring and plain for something to actually be accessible. So just a second, there we go. So we don't want to like miss out on the cool factor just because we're making something accessible. The other thing to keep in mind is that animation is also really useful. As we have more and more complex web apps and smaller screens to work on, what we're finding is you can't see all of an interface all at once, and animation can really help us as we show and hide these things. You can it helps people cognitively understand, where did that menu go and how can I get it back when I need it? So these are the kinds of issues that we are trying to work through as we work with accessibility. There's a range of techniques and things to be concerned about, but I'm going to talk about one in particular, and that is the CSS prefers reduced motion query. In my opinion, it gives you the most bang for your buck in terms of animation accessibility, because it gives you the ability to have both animation for people who want it and no animation for people who don't. The first place that we start with this is the reduced motion settings. These are now available in all major operating systems. I'm showing here on the screen the Windows setting called Show Animations in Windows. That's a toggle you can turn on and off. The first place to do this was iOS 7, mostly because they introduced an interface that had a lot of zooming, and they decided, well, we need to put a stop to that because it's actually making people sick and people can't swap an app without getting motion sickness. Maybe that's a little bit too much animation. Android and Mac desktop also have controls for this. Not a lot of people know about this. This kind of feature was released in a very low-key kind of way. So if you know people who might benefit from this setting, please do tell them about it. If they don't like a lot of animation, I quite often turn mine on my phone and I don't have any named diagnosed problems. I just don't like my windows zooming around a lot. So, you know, it's handy for everybody. The second aspect of this is that we now have in CSS a media query, which can actually respond to user preferences, such as that reduced motion. So you might be familiar, if you do any design and dev work, you might be familiar with the media queries of CSS. And if you're not familiar with them, what they do is they're a way of having our CSS ask the browser, hey, what size is the screen right now? Because I can adjust the layout to fit it better. What we have now, which gives us some improved accessibility, is the preferred reduced motion query. And this is a way that we can ask the browser to check with the operating system and say, hey, has this person asked for fewer animations? Awesome. This is a wonderful thing to have. We also have a method for it in JavaScript, but usually I use that to just query my CSS. So I'm not going to go a lot into the detail of that one today. The way that we use this reduced motion query is, say we've got a website and it's got a whole bunch of animation in it all over the place. So for example, I've got a little bit of code here that say we've got a modal window and I've got it to scale out and zoom right in as it opens. It zooms at you, and then when you close it, it'll zoom back. That's exactly the kind of thing that can trigger people's vestibular disorders as a problem. So we don't want to do that. What we can do is use the prefers reduced motion query to say, hey, if someone has asked for less animation, let's remove that transition from our styles. We just want to give it to the people who want it. This is a really simple thing to do, and it has such a huge benefit for so many people. We can get quite fancy with it, and we can use it in a lot of different ways. One of those ways is if you have a legacy site that has animation all over it, and you're not 100% certain where all of the animation is in the code, you can just do a bit of a blanket stop animation, stop all of it. That's what the star in the code is for in the CSS. That's saying every element, every class, if it's got a transition or an animation class on it, property on it, please just remove it. Don't. That's quite a heavy-handed way of doing it. If you have a legacy website, though, where no one's going to give you much time to work on a finessed, customized solution, it can be a good way of making sure that you're not harming anybody just to do that. However, I would prefer to use it more as treating animation as an enhancement. And for that, what we do is we do all of our usual CSS and we don't add any animation. We just sort of say, look, the standard way that this website works is to not have any animation. But if somebody has expressed no preference, they haven't turned on that toggle to say prefers reduced motion, and this person has no preference, well, in that case, let's give them some animation. Let's have a transition and a transform. The other thing that we can use is to make sure that not all animation types are going to trigger accessibility problems. If we've got some tasteful color changes, a little bit of opacity going on, that doesn't have to sit inside our prefers reduced motion query. We can put that outside. So we have a lot of control and a lot of options for that. Support for the prefers reduced motion query is pretty much as good as it's going to get, given that IE11 doesn't support it, but IE11 isn't being developed anymore. Edge, particularly the new Chromium version of Edge, does support prefers reduced motion. So we are actually really ready to use this kind of CSS right now if we want it. This is my idea of what is the most bang for your buck with accessible animation. Respect your user's operating system settings. And we don't really mind why somebody has turned this setting on. Some people will, I have heard, my nephew tells me that he turns off animation settings because it chews through the battery too much on his very dodgy cheap computer. You never know why somebody might have turned it on. And as accessibility professionals, we don't much care. If somebody's asked for less motion, we can give them less motion because that's what they asked for. I have so much to say about animation and accessibility. This has just been the one thing that I wish everybody would try. But if you would like to talk more about it with me, and it would make me really happy if you were to get in touch with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or at work. It's a really fascinating topic with lots of aspects to dig into. I hope you've enjoyed. Have fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. So if this is your one top thing you wish someone would do with animation, what's your second one?
Oh, toggles. I would love people, particularly on websites that have a lot of animation, I would love to have in the settings or right up the top in the heading, a way to say, please just stop. I don't want it right now. Because not everybody is aware that they have. Some people only discovered that they had a vestibular disorder when they went to a website that was zooming at them. It's not a fun way to find out, I would imagine. And sometimes you can handle it and sometimes you're just not in the mood. So I like the idea of having a toggle so people can adjust it. Marcy Sutton has a really great way of using local storage so that if someone toggles it off, you can remember that for the next time they come back to the website. Super cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. We'll take a brief break as we have Russ set up.
Can you see that fine?
I can see that perfectly.
Too easy. Should we kick off?
Did you want to share your video or you're leaving that off?
How does one do that? Oh, I might as well leave it off. They don't need to see me.
I have to send a request that you can turn it on if you want to.
Hang on. Lost my mouse. Sorry, could you do that again? There we go. There we go.
There we go.
All good.
Okay. I should probably start my own video after that. I'm getting pretty good on the controls, you know, as the second last person in line. I've gone through 10. I'm definitely getting better at the Zoom thing. Well, as I mentioned, it's second last presentation. Hope you're hanging in there with us. Now I would like to introduce Russ Weekly, Design System Principal at IAG. Russ is joining us from Sydney to talk about how to build accessible UI components. And I'm particularly interested in how Russ is going to challenge our captioners this time. He always challenges our captioners with a really long, complex word to see how they go. And I'm wondering if he's going to do it again.
This time what I think I'm going to do is talk super fast just to make their fingers bleed.
I don't think they'll love you for it. And I've actually been told before to slow down, actually more for an Auslan interpreter than a captioner, but yes.
Sorry, did I get you to say you'd like me to go faster? Fine.
Awesome, Russ. I will turn control over to you.
Thank you very much. So for this presentation, I'm going to be talking about 7 criteria that can be used to make accessible UI components. And then I'm going to show you an example of a UI component built using 3 different methods. And finally, I'm going to use the 7 criteria to determine the accessibility of each method. So let's start with 7 criteria that make an accessible UI component. And if you're watching along, see if you can guess them as we go. First one is an old one from the 1920s, semantics. All HTML elements have specific semantic meaning. And where possible, we should be using these HTML elements for their intended purpose, not abusing them like modern developers often do. When using HTML elements incorrectly, what that can do is cause confusion for assistive technologies. So if an element's being used in a different way from its intended purpose, what we should be doing is assigning explicit ARIA roles to help. So here we have an example of a developer who for some strange reason has a div instead of a button. But what we can do is give it a role of button, and that helps assistive technologies know that it is now a button. The second criteria is accessible name. So many HTML elements have an accessible name already defined. And these names help assistive technologies to identify that element. And they can come from a range of different sources. So let's look at some examples. So for a link, the content of the link is actually the accessible name. And in this case, the link says red fish. for the accessible name for an image comes from the alt attribute or the content of the alt attribute. And in this case, you're going to, unbelievable, it's called redfish. And the third one is, could be something like, for an import, the label could be the accessible name if they're explicitly associated. So the label says redfish, so the accessible name for that input, because they're explicitly associated, is redfish. I hope you're sick of redfish by now. So for some UI components though, there's no accessible name. And in some cases, there's an accessible name, but it lacks some sort of clarity. So in these cases, we can use specific ARIA attributes to provide a new accessible name. And a quick example would be a button where the developers just put an X, obviously to close a modal or something like that, but that's not a very good accessible name. So we could use the ARIA label and say something like close and go to redfish, which is now I don't know whether it's a better name, but that's an accessible name. The third criteria is focusable. Interactive UI components must be able to receive keyboard focus. And if UI components are built using different elements that don't natively accept focus, then we're probably going to have to set our own focus on them. So for simple components, that could be tab index 0. For complex components, we may need to set multiple elements with focus. The fourth criteria is keyboard interaction. So all UI components must have full accessibility using keyboard keystrokes only, as has been taught by several other presenters. And these keystrokes should be well-established keystroke patterns. Again, it's already been talked about tonight. You shouldn't be reinventing your own keystrokes. The fifth criteria is visible states. So all interactive UI components have a range of possible states. And these can include things like hover, focus, active, and in some cases checked. And each of these states should be clearly visible. And more importantly, they should be unique. So there should be a differentiation between each of the different states. Number 6 is functional states. So interactive UI components may need to change states at times. So that could be something like changing from unchecked to checked, but it could be expanded, disabled, pressed, selected, etc. All these are potential states. These states need to be clearly communicated to assistive technologies. Now for native HTML elements, radio, checkbox, selects, and those sort of things, those states are already baked in. So if you select something or check it, it's already going to be defined for assistive technologies. But if you're using a non-native element, like a div or a button in the wrong purpose, then ARIA can be used to define that state better for assistive technologies. So here we have, again, a dreaded div. And in this case, it's obviously being used for a checkbox for some reason. And so what we need to do is when it becomes checked, we need to inject in the Boolean checked attribute. And we'd also need to put in the ARIA checked equals true attribute. And that tells assistive technologies that it's now checked. And the final criteria we need to look at is existing UI conventions. So UI components should be designed in a way to work with well-established ways of working. You shouldn't be reinventing the wheel every time you come to something. And I've seen that a lot when building design systems. Designers take a component and they build it in a completely new and fresh ways, trying to be creative, but often it causes confusion for users. This is especially true though for two types of users, cognitive impaired users and technically challenged users. So if you're going to do them, if you're going to reinvent the wheel, you need to rigorously test with the intended audience and make sure that they understand these non-conventional methods. So there we have the 7 criteria. Did they match what you're thinking? If you disagree, I'd love to hear from it in the YouTube channel or directly abuse me at any point in time. So let's now jump on to the second part, which is 1 UI component, 3 methods. So let's look at our UI component. Basically, we have a heading saying choose your preferred colors. And we have a set of options, red, green, blue, purple, yellow. And you can see that we can choose 1 or more of these options. Now, over the years, I've seen developers and designers tackle this using a range of methods, and we're going to look at 3. The first method is checkboxes. And in this, we wrap everything in a field set. We use a legend because now it's associated with the content below, so that's great. We use native checkboxes and we use labels. And most importantly, the checkboxes and labels are explicitly associated using matching for and IDs. Beautiful. So if we look at our scorecard across the 7 criteria, everything works really well because everything's baked in. Semantics are baked in. It's focusable. All the keyboards and states are baked in, and it's well understood. So this is highly accessible. Method number 2 uses checkboxes again, but the designers have designed them to look like buttons. Have any of you seen this in the wild? I'm seeing this a lot now. So we have a heading, we have a set of options, and you can choose multiple options. And behind the scenes, it's still accessible. Field sets, legends, a checkbox, but in this case, it's hidden and the label is put up over the top. And we still have for an ID. So generally speaking, it looks the same. And if you look down the list, it's quite accessible. It passes everything except when it gets to existing convention, the 7th criteria. This method doesn't use existing UI conventions. What it does is it changes the checkboxes to look more like buttons. And why is that a problem? Well, the default nature of buttons is they can be pressed or triggered to create some sort of action. They don't have a check state default. And what's even weirder is users may not understand that they're checking on them or that they can do multiple checks for them. So this method should be tested carefully with users before being used. And the third method, final method, is the button. So again, heading, series of options, can choose multiple options, but in this case we have no field set, no legend, so that heading's not associated with anything, and we have no checkboxes. Instead we have buttons, insanity. So let's look at the scorecard. Well, the semantics are wrong. We have a button, so we need to use ARIA to tell screen readers what it is. It does have accessible name and focus baked in, but keyboard interactions, visible states, functional states, and even existing conventions are all flawed and would need to be redefined. So this method starts out using an entirely inappropriate element, the button element. Extensive work will need to be done to make this component accessible. Let's take an example. We need to take that button and give it a role of checkbox. And then when it's checked, we need to inject in the things we saw before, checked, and ARIA checked equals true. And that's just a start. So on top of that, this method has the same problems as the previous one in that it's not a well understood paradigm. So you would need to test it with audience as well. So what do we learn from all this? Well, basically, the main lesson here is that we should always try and use native HTML elements for UI components. Accessibility is baked into all these elements, from semantics, accessible names, keyboard functionality, states, and more. The further away you move from native HTML elements, the more work you have to put in to try and force them to operate in an accessible way. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Russ.
It's an honor.
I absolutely agree. I see so many components in the wild that have been built from the ground up, and you could just use a native component.
It's sad, isn't it? It feels like we've gone. There was a period in 2003-04 where web standards were big and people understood them, and now with React and everything, it's just gone.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's
the Wild West.
Sorry?
The Wild West all over again.
Yes, I have an analogy of an ARIA cowboy and cowgirl, and they like ride into town and they go, I know what this town needs. It needs a bit more ARIA, and they start taking it out of their sack and sprinkling it around, only to ride out and leave the town with the ARIA mess.
Very true. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Russ. We also have a few people who are lamenting the fact that they can't heckle you in person.
Yes, so am I.
They say that this is the downside of live streaming, so maybe you will get heckled on Twitter.
I'm also missing the fact that I can't look out in the audience and abuse people. That's not a lot of fun. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Russ. Sorry for spoiling your fun. All right, we've got our last presentation coming up from Corin. Give us a tick, we'll get set up and we'll be back soon.
Oh. Hello.
Hey, Corin, I can hear you and see you now.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Nope.
No. Okay, so I have to go back into this guy and share my screen.
That's it.
Okay, looks like we're halfway there. How about now?
That's perfect. Hovercraft.
Okay.
Fantastic. All set, Coral?
All right, yep, let's go, shall we?
Right. So I'd like to introduce Corin Edwards as our last speaker for A11y Bytes 2020. He is a user experience designer at Expedia Group. He's joining us today from Brisbane, and he's going to talk to us about an approach for creating accessible colour palettes for hover states.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, what Sarah just said. My name's Corin Edwards. I've got a bunch of interaction and user experience in the cultural, the public, and the private sector as well. I've decided to take a little bit of a look at hover states. I've kind of always been the person in teams that has been a little bit focused on mobile. And so for a long time, I didn't really sort of pay much mind to hover states. And a couple of people a little bit wiser than me sort of challenged me on it. And so I decided that I wanted to look at what was out there and found that it was a little bit lacking. So these are just some of the explorations that I've done myself around hover colors and accessibility. So yeah, what we're going to look at is, oh, where are we? Hang on a second. There we go. An approach for creating accessible color palettes for the visual appearance of buttons with hover states. So the first thing to note is that hover is weird. Hover is not a metaphor. The hover state's best equivalent metaphor from the real world is perhaps the sensation of feeling a button. That makes it an abstract visual representation of a physical sensation. So the image that I have on the screen at the moment is a Braun T1000 CD radio designed by the great Dieter Rams. And as you can see, it's got all these fantastic buttons on it. Like it's got clickety-clacky buttons, it's got switches that can be flicked, and it's got all these dials, and they all have their own materials and their own textures and their own shapes as well. And so it's kind of like in this sort of wheelhouse that hover states are trying to do what they do. This is an illustration of what a button doesn't do, a button in the real world. When someone pushes their hand against a button before actually pressing it, a button does not light up in response to their press. So hover is kind of like a strange state. Hovering over a button reveals an intent to consider to use a button. It is distinct from the action of using a button. So as I was mentioning before, I went out to look for best practice advice on how to select colors to be used for hover states in a way that was accessible. So the first place I went, obviously, was WCAG and to the always thrilling read of Success Criterion 1.4.3. Now, this gives us a lot of information. It tells us basically that we need to get this 4.5:1 ratio, and it gives us a lot of technical detail about it. But as someone who deals with the visual appearance and the visual design of the tools that are being built, it doesn't really give me much guidance in that area. So one of the few things that I did find though is this blog post by Rob Giampietro. I'm almost certainly butchering that name, so I apologize. And it reads as such: unlike new and visited links, hovering leaves no visible trace and creates no visible record. It's a game of peekaboo. For a moment, the page reveals something more about itself than it has first expressed. At this moment, we glimpse some key vulnerability, what it would like you to do, what you could do, what it thinks you want, what it wants you to want. And for me, coming from a visual design side, this gives a really sort of a clear idea about the intention of hover, and in particular, this idea of a key vulnerability. And so when I kind of looked at the landscape of how hover was being used, I felt that this idea of a vulnerability covered at least sort of one of the patterns. And what I found across the board was two patterns. And you'll have to forgive me because so far I've given them really terrible names. I call one the rustling grass pattern and the other one the glowing T-Rex pattern. So let me explain because those names are not particularly useful. The rustling grass pattern is what happens when you hover over a button and it changes the color of the button in order to make the label of the button have higher contrast and be easier to read. I kind of liken it to the idea of a lion surveying the savannah looking into grassland and seeing the rustle of grass of a deer or something like that. And that rustle of grass provides more information for the lion. And so in this analogy, the user is the lion, and the prey is the content that they're searching for within the website or within an app. But then we have the alternative to that, which is the glowing T-Rex pattern. And like a glowing T-Rex, it's only concerned with the vision or the observing of movement. So when we hover over one of these buttons, what happens is that the color of the button, the luminosity of it increases. And as a result, it sort of appears to sort of jump out and glow on the screen, which is good in a way, but it also means that we're sacrificing the clarity of the label that's on that button. So just for a few examples to see how this actually looks in practice. This is Trello, and what I'm looking at the moment is this little button that says boards in the top left-hand corner up here. And if we were to hover over that, we get the rustling grass pattern. So the color in the background of the button gets darker, and so it makes the white text in front clearer. Obviously not clear enough to pass any of our WCAG requirements, but we'll leave that to another day. If I then move across to this personal button instead, we can see that when we hover over that, we get the glowing T-Rex pattern. And instead, the background has become brighter. And so this white text is now sitting on a bright blue background. Not great. This is compliments. Usually the content area of compliments is pretty great, but we've got a little bit of a problem with this create button. So you can see here that to begin with, the create button is very clear, but again, we get the glowing T-Rex pattern where as we apply color on hover, we actually make the label more difficult to read. And it's quite interesting because just to the left of that, we've got this other button, which I think is sort of, whoops, is clear, is sort of like subordinate and of a lower priority than the create button. But here we're using the glowing T-Rex pattern again, but we're actually like passing all of our color contrast requirements. So it's a bit of a shame that that one gets such better treatment than the create button. And finally, this is Reddit. I'm talking from Brisbane, so I'm showing you the Brisbane Reddit. I should note also that a lot of these apps do actually allow users to customize their color schemes, but the apps also allow users to customize their color schemes in a way that will make it more difficult for people to read. So here on the right-hand side, where we've got the create post button, if we hover over that, again, we get the glowing T-Rex pattern. So we bring up the backgrounds and we make the actual label more difficult to read. But on the left side here, on one of these buttons, we've got the rustling grass pattern. And so we're actually doing a pretty good job here. Once we're sort of hovering over this button, we can kind of sort of make it out pretty clearly. And I think that's kind of the thing that sort of like struck me when I started looking into this, was the fact that these things are a little bit all over the place. And they're like, sometimes they're using the glowing T-Rex pattern where things glow, sometimes the rustling grass where things sort of get darker and things get clearer. And I'm sort of just like trying to figure out what the principle behind this is. And what I suspect it is that we as visual designers are reverse engineering our hover colors into our palettes. So we create a flat screen that has the palette integrated into it. And then almost as an afterthought, we start like attaching differentiation to the hover states of buttons. So as an alternative to that, and to provide some kind of structure, at least to start thinking about this, and maybe thinking about it before the fact, I came up with an approach. And it's pretty simple, but we'll see how we go. So a hover state is a decision point. When a user has to make a decision, they should be provided with the greatest clarity at that point of decision. At that moment, a user interface should respond with increased contrast to create greater legibility. And to put that in a much simpler way, choose hover colors that are in the direction of more contrast. So when we have our two patterns here, my recommendation is to get rid of the glowing T-Rex pattern. which is a bit of a shame because of the two sort of directions that I looked at. The one that I'm suggesting is the one that doesn't have the cool name. That's unfortunate. So just a few examples. Here we are starting with grayscale. So we've got a dark button on a light background. And so I'm just using the RGB values here to hopefully make things a little bit easier to understand. But our RGB button on the left here is all of the red, the green, blue all have a value of 80, which gives you this sort of medium gray. And then on hover, I'm suggesting that we subtract a value of 40 from that. So making it considerably darker. Here we have the same principle, but on a light button. So you can see here that the red, the green, and the blue are all set to 150. We add in 40 to all of those. And so our button lights up, but it does so in a way that makes sufficient contrast with the label that's sitting behind it. Reintroducing color, you can see that our values are maybe a little bit more complicated now, but the principle is just the same. We're either increasing the lightness of a button or we're increasing the darkness of a button on hover. Red variation and a green variation too. So these little examples that I've made, I sort of went to a little bit of effort to make these all AAA. But obviously the principle still stands if we're expanding that color palette out to either match a brand or if there is a specific reason for a specific palette, then that can be accompanied by this as well. Next we have ghost variation. So these buttons follow the same rules. You can kind of see that things get a little bit tricky around here because the light button, the differentiation between these two is pretty clear. But in this case, the differentiation between the dark buttons is not so much. So I think I might need to do a little bit more sort of tweaking on that end. But essentially, that's it. Choose hover colors in the direction of more contrast. That's my advice. So I realize that this is sort of me kind of focusing down on what might be considered as sort of pretty minor detail in the grand scheme of things. And I guess the way that I like to think about it is that the tools that I sort of help build for people, I kind of like to be inclusive of all the possible circumstances that those people could be in. So if you're in a situation where you are time poor, or maybe you're suffering from fatigue, or even if you're just sort of in a stressed out situation, I like the idea of being able to prepare something by default, something that doesn't need to have sort of high contrast mode applied to it, and that will make something sort of easy to use and will remove at least some stress out of a person's life. So even though I am sort of narrowing down on something quite specific here, I think there is value for this across the board. But yeah, if you agree or disagree, please be vocal about it, and be vocal at Corin Rules on Twitter if you would like to. And that's all from me. Bye.
Oh, thanks so much for that, Corin. Actually, it fits perfectly with our little bite-sized tips and presentations. So I love the way you talked about it's the decision point for someone. And I think that's really true.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
No problem. And I'm not going to be able to now look at hover states without thinking about the glowing T-Rex and the rustling.
Yeah. Oh, well, if nothing else, it's memorable.
It absolutely is. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Corin.
Cool.
All right. So that actually brings us to the end of A11y Bytes for 2020. I want to thank you all so much for attending. I don't know how many of you have hung in there for the 3 hours, but we are absolutely going to share the recordings of these sessions on our YouTube channel once we've had a chance to edit them and clean up the captions. I would like to thank our presenters who have shared their insights and wisdom with us today. I love that Global Accessibility Awareness Day, its mission is all about getting people to talk, think and learn about digital access and people with different disabilities. And at least for me, today's presentations have done exactly that. And I know that they've inspired a lot of talk on chat and maybe even you going into your team or your organization tomorrow and maybe even sharing some of the things that you learnt today. I would also like to thank Intopia for their sponsorship of the live captions. and also the team behind A11y Bytes who have made this happen. In particular, Adam, Chris, and Stuart. Now, for those of you who know A11y Bytes, you would probably know that we do have a conference, A11y Camp, each year. We are announcing today that A11y Camp will be on the 12th and the 13th of November. We have made the decision to move it online. We're not sure what the world is going to look like by November, and we certainly don't want to put anyone at risk. So we will be announcing more details about the A11y Camp online conference coming up on the 12th of November soon. You can find out more, or at least stay up to date with us by following us on social media or subscribing to our newsletter. And with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful day, that if you haven't had a drink already, you can go have a drink. I certainly am, and that you've enjoyed the sessions. Thank you. Bye.